Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was a sage summoned alongside the boy who could die. Naruto X Rem Re 0, starting life in another world. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. A Sage's Arrival. The world fractured into a kaleidoscope of screaming colors, a chaotic symphony of sensations that ripped Naruto Uzumaki from the familiar embrace of his own reality. One moment, he was standing on the precipice of a new era of peace, the weight of a war won settling on his shoulders like a heavy but welcome cloak. The next, a blinding light, a gut-wrenching pull, and then, this. He landed with the practiced grace of a seasoned shinobi, his worn sandals barely whispering against the grimy cobblestones. The air that filled his lungs was thick with the unfamiliar scents of roasted nuts, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely sweet and cloying. The cacophony of a bustling city, so different from the organized hum of Konoha, assaulted his ears. Towering, timber-framed buildings, their upper floors leaning precariously over the narrow street, blotted out the sun, casting long, menacing shadows. Naruto's senses, honed by years of life or death battle, and perfected by the gentle touch of Sage Mode, flared to life. He could feel the thrum of 1,000 heartbeats, the subtle shift of air currents, the nervous sweat of a pickpocket weaving through the crowd. This was not his world. The very energy of this place, the ambient chakra, or lack thereof, was alien to him. He was a man out of time and place, a living legend tossed into an unknown sea. Yet, there was no fear in him, only a profound, unshakable calm. He had faced down gods and monsters, stared into the abyss of hatred and despair, and emerged not unscathed, but stronger. This was just another Tuesday. A flicker of movement, a desperate gasp, and the scent of fear-laced sweat cut through the urban miasma. Naruto's head snapped to the left, his cerulean eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locking onto a scene unfolding in a shadowy alleyway. 3 brutish men, their faces contorted in ugly sneers, had cornered a young girl. She was a slip of a thing, with fiery red hair tied back a messy ponytail and eyes the color of amethysts that blazed with defiant terror. "Hand it over, little rat," one of the thugs growled, his voice a low rumble. He brandished a rusty dagger, its edge glinting menacingly in the sliver of light that penetrated the alley. "I told you, I don't have anything." The girl shot back, her voice trembling but laced with a surprising amount of steel. She clutched a small, ornate insignia to her chest, her knuckles white. "Don't lie to us," another of the men chimed in, stepping closer. "We saw you. Now, give us the shiny, and maybe we'll let you go with just a few bruises." Naruto sighed, a soft exhalation of breath that was lost in the city's din. He had hoped for a gentler introduction to this new world, a moment to gather his bearings. But some things, it seemed, were universal. Thugs were thugs, no matter the dimension. He took a single, silent step forward, his presence so unassuming that the 3 men didn't even notice him until he spoke, his voice a calm, resonant baritone that cut through the tension like a finely honed blade. Now, is that any way to treat a lady?" The 3 men whirled around, their eyes wide with surprise. They saw a tall, well-built man with sun-kissed blonde hair that fell in a messy cascade around his face. He wore a simple black and orange outfit that was unlike anything they had ever seen, and his eyes were what truly gave them pause. They were the color of the deepest ocean, and they held an unnerving depth, a calm confidence that seemed to mock their pathetic attempt at intimidation. "Who the hell are you?" the first thug snarled, trying to regain his bravado. "This doesn't concern you. Piss off." Naruto smiled, a genuine, easygoing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm afraid it does. You see, I have a thing about bullies. I don't like them." The leader of the trio scoffed, emboldened by Naruto's relaxed posture. "You and what army?" Naruto's smile widened. "Just me." He didn't move from his spot, but a palpable pressure settled over the alley. The air grew thick and heavy, and the shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce around the lone figure. The thugs, who had spent their lives preying on the weak, suddenly felt a primal fear they had never known. It was the fear of a rabbit facing a wolf, of a fish caught in the gaze of a shark. "Last chance," Naruto said, his voice still calm, but now with an undercurrent of steel that sent a shiver down their spines. Walk away. Pride, stupidity, or a fatal combination of the two, spurred the leader to action. With a guttural roar, he lunged forward, his dagger aimed at Naruto's heart. The girl, felt, squeezed her eyes shut, a small cry escaping her lips. She had been in tight spots before, had scraped and fought her way out of more than her fair share of trouble. But this was different. These men were bigger, meaner, and she had seen the cruel glint in their eyes. She braced herself for the inevitable sound of steel meeting flesh, for the thud of a body hitting the ground. Instead, she heard a soft whoosh, followed by a series of sharp cracks and a trio of strangled groans. She opened her eyes, her amethyst gaze widening in disbelief. The three thugs were on the ground, twitching and groaning, their limbs bent at unnatural angles. The man who had saved her, the blonde stranger, hadn't moved an inch. He stood in the exact same spot, his hands in his pockets, his easy smile still in place. Now, he said, his voice once again a gentle baritone, was that so hard? He turned to Felt, his gaze softening as he took in her disheveled state. You all right, miss? Felt, for the first time in a long time, was speechless. She had seen her fair share of brawlers, of tough guys who thought they were something special. But she had never seen anything like this. It wasn't just the speed, the effortless display of power. It was the confidence. The absolute certainty with which he carried himself. She swallowed hard, finding her voice. Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks to you. Don't mention it, Naruto said, his smile finally reaching his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that was both charming and disarming. He walked over to the fallen thugs and casually relieved them of their ill-gotten gains, a small pouch of coins and a few trinkets. He then turned back to Felt and offered her the pouch. I believe this is yours, he said. Felt stared at the pouch, then back at Naruto. She was a thief, a survivor. She knew the value of things, and she knew that no one did anything for free. What's the catch? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Naruto chuckled, a warm, hearty sound that seemed to chase away the last of the alley's chill. No catch, just a simple act of kindness. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in the tattered clothes, the dirt-smudged face, the fierce, independent spirit that burned in her eyes. Though, I wouldn't mind a little information in return. You see, I'm new in town, and I seem to be a bit lost. Felt's suspicion warred with her gratitude. This man was an enigma, a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. He was powerful, yet gentle, confident, yet humble, and he had a smile that could probably charm the scales off a dragon. Lost, huh, she said, a small smirk playing on her lips. You're in Lugnica, the royal capital. And from the looks of it, you're in the slums. Not exactly a tourist destination. Lugnica, Naruto repeated, testing the word on his tongue. It was as foreign as everything else in this strange new world. And the slums, you say? I've seen worse. He glanced around the alley, at the grimy walls, the overflowing refuse, the general air of decay. But I've also seen better. A lot better. His gaze then settled back on Felt, and there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that went beyond simple kindness. It was a look of understanding, of empathy. He saw not just a street urchin, a thief, but a young girl who had been dealt a bad hand and was playing it the only way she knew how. So, Felt, he said, his voice soft, what's your story? The question caught her off guard. No one ever asked about her story. They saw the tattered clothes, the street-smart attitude, and they made their assumptions. But this man, this stranger, he looked at her as if he genuinely wanted to know. And so, for reasons she couldn't quite comprehend, she told him. She told him about growing up in the slums, about the old man who had taken her in, about the constant struggle for survival. She told him about her dream of one day escaping this life. Of finding a place where she could be safe, where she wouldn't have to steal to eat. Naruto listened patiently, his gaze never wavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or empty promises. He just listened, and in that simple act of listening, he gave her something she hadn't realized she was craving, a sense of validation, a feeling that she mattered. When she was finished, a comfortable silence settled between them. The sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background, leaving them in their own little bubble. "You're a survivor, Felt," Naruto said finally. His voice filled with a quiet admiration. "You've got a fire in you that a lot of people lack. Don't ever let anyone extinguish it." Felt felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the midday sun. She wasn't used to compliments, wasn't used to people seeing the good in her. "So, what about you?" she asked, turning the tables. "What's your story, mister?" "Lost in the slums," Naruto chuckled, a wistful look in his eyes. "It's a long one, and probably not one you'd believe." "Try me," Felt challenged, her curiosity piqued. And so, Naruto told her a story. Not the whole story, of course. Not about the tailed beasts, or the fourth great ninja war, or the goddess he had helped seal away. But he told her about a village hidden in the leaves, about a dream of becoming its leader. About the bonds of friendship that had seen him through the darkest of times. He spoke of a world where chakra flowed like a river, where shinobi could walk on water and breathe fire. Where giant toads could be summoned to aid in battle. He spoke of a world filled with both incredible beauty and unimaginable pain. Felt listened with wide-eyed wonder, her skepticism slowly giving way to a grudging belief. The things he described were fantastical, impossible, yet the way he spoke, the conviction in his voice, the sadness that flickered in his eyes when he spoke of lost comrades, it was all too real. As he spoke, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alley, a man whose presence was so overwhelming that it seemed to bend the very air around him. He was tall and handsome, with fiery red hair and eyes the color of a clear blue sky. He wore the immaculate white and gold uniform of a royal knight, and a longsword with a hilt in the shape of a dragon's head rested at his side. This was Reinhard van Astria, the Sword Saint, a man whose power was the stuff of legends. He had been drawn to the alley by the sudden spike of power, the brief but intense flare of energy that had accompanied Naruto's effortless takedown of the thugs. He had expected to find a powerful magic user, a dangerous criminal, someone who posed a threat to the peace of the capital. Instead, he found this. A strange blonde man in an even stranger outfit, sitting comfortably on a crate and sharing a story with a known thief. "Felt," Reinhard said, his voice calm but firm, "I've been looking for you." Felt's eyes widened in panic. She scrambled to her feet, her hand instinctively going to the insignia she had stolen. "Reinhard, I was just..." Reinhard's gaze shifted to Naruto, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you are..." Naruto stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He was slightly shorter than Reinhard, but he met the Sword Saint's gaze without a hint of intimidation. "Just a traveler," Naruto said, his easy smile back in place. "Passing through." Reinhard's gaze lingered on Naruto for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He could sense no malice from this man, no ill intent. But he could sense power. A deep, dormant power that was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was like a sleeping volcano, calm on the surface, but with a raging inferno just beneath. "I see," Reinhard said, his tone neutral. He then turned his attention back to Felt. "Felt, the insignia. It's a matter of great importance. I need you to return it." Felt hesitated, her gaze darting from Reinhard to Naruto. She was caught between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, there was Reinhard, the embodiment of law and order, a man she knew she couldn't outrun or outfight. On the other hand, there was Naruto, the stranger who had saved her, who had treated her with a kindness she had rarely known. Naruto, sensing her dilemma, stepped forward. "Perhaps I can be of some assistance," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "What seems to be the problem?" Reinhard explained the situation. The insignia was one of 5 that represented the candidates for the upcoming royal selection. A process to choose the next ruler of Lugnica. Felt's theft of the insignia had thrown the entire process into jeopardy. Naruto listened intently, his sharp mind quickly piecing together the political puzzle. A royal selection, 5 candidates, a stolen insignia, it was a situation ripe with a potential for conflict, for intrigue, for chaos. And right in the middle of it all was this young girl. This thief with a fiery spirit and a heart of gold. "I see," Naruto said when Reinhard had finished. He turned to Felt, his gaze gentle. "Felt, he's right, you need to give it back." Felt looked at him, her amethyst eyes filled with a mixture of betrayal and confusion. "But, I thought I know what you thought, Naruto said, his voice soft. But this is bigger than you, bigger than me. This is about the future of this kingdom. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Felt looked down at the insignia in her hand, then back up at Naruto. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the unwavering belief in his words. And she knew he was right. With a heavy sigh, she held out the insignia to Reinhard. Here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Reinhard took the insignia, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Felt. He then turned to Naruto. And you, traveler, you have my gratitude. You have prevented a great deal of trouble. Don't mention it, Naruto said with a shrug. I was just happy to help. As Reinhard turned to leave, a thought occurred to him. He paused and looked back at Naruto. You said you were a traveler. Do you have a place to stay? Naruto chuckled. Not at the moment. I was kind of hoping to figure that out as I went along. Reinhard considered this for a moment. This man was a mystery, a powerful one at that. It would be wise to keep an eye on him. And what better way to do that than to keep him close? I have a proposition for you, Reinhard said. There is a noble house, the house of a candidate for the royal selection, that is in need of protection. Your skills, I believe, would be a valuable asset. Naruto's eyebrows shot up. A job offer. Already, this world was full of surprises. And what would this job entail? He asked, his interest piqued. You would be a guest of the house, a protector of the candidate and her interests, Reinhard explained. In return, you would have food, lodging, and a generous stipend. And you would have my personal gratitude, which, I assure you, is not something to be taken lightly. Naruto glanced at Felt, who was looking at him with a mixture of hope and apprehension. He then looked back at Reinhard, a slow smile spreading across his face. A noble house, you say? He mused. A candidate for the throne. Sounds like fun. He extended his hand to Reinhard. You've got a deal. Reinhard took his hand, a firm, solid grip. Excellent. The candidate's name is Amelia. I'll escort you to the Rosewall mansion myself. And so, with a final, reassuring smile to Felt, Naruto Uzumaki, the sage of six paths, the hero of the fourth great ninja war, found himself swept up in the currents of a new destiny. He had come to this world a stranger, a lost soul. But already, he had made a friend, a powerful ally, and had set his feet on a path that would lead him to the very heart of this kingdom's power struggles. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city of Lugnica. As he walked alongside Reinhard, leaving the slums and their shadows behind, Naruto couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement, a thrill of anticipation. This world was new, it was strange, it was full of dangers and uncertainties. But it was also full of possibilities. And Naruto Uzumaki was a man who thrived on possibilities. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The House of Veiled Intent. The carriage ride from the capital's grime-caked slums to the verdant expanse of Margrave Rosewall L. Mather's domain was a study in contrasts that Naruto absorbed with the quiet intensity of a predator assessing new territory. The oppressive, tightly packed squalor of the city gave way to rolling hills painted in hues of emerald and jade. The air thinning and sweetening with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight, no longer filtered through a haze of smoke and desperation, fell in clean, golden shafts across the landscape, illuminating dust motes dancing in the carriage's opulent interior. Reinhard van Astria, the sword saint, sat opposite him, a picture of noble composure. He had dismissed his formal guard, choosing to escort Naruto personally, a gesture not lost on the shinobi. It was a mark of respect, but also a subtle method of observation. Naruto, for his part, projected an aura of relaxed amiability. One hand resting on his knee while the other occasionally brushed against the smooth, cool glass of the window. He let the silence stretch, a comfortable and assessing quiet, allowing the night to make the first move. You adapt quickly, Reinhard noted, his voice a calm baritone that matched the gentle rhythm of the carriage wheels. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. Most would be overwhelmed by the city, by the circumstances, by me. Naruto's lips quirked into a half smile. He turned his gaze from the passing scenery, his cerulean eyes meeting Reinhard's with an unnerving directness. I've had a lot of practice with being overwhelmed. The trick is to not let it show. He leaned back against the plush velvet cushioning, the movement fluid and utterly at ease. Besides, you seem like a decent guy, Reinhard. A little stiff, maybe, but decent. Why would I be overwhelmed? The casual, almost impertinent familiarity seemed to startle the sword saint, if only for a fraction of a second. A lesser noble would have taken offense, but Reinhard's gaze held only a flicker of genuine surprise, followed by a hint of amusement. You are, unlike anyone I have ever met, Naruto Uzumaki. Another thing I get told a lot, Naruto replied lightly. He decided to shift the conversation, to probe the depths of his new companion and the world he now inhabited. So, this Amelia you mentioned. What's her story? You said she's a candidate for the throne. That seems like a dangerous job. Reinhard's expression sobered, the faint amusement vanishing, replaced by a professional gravity. It is. The royal family was taken by disease some time ago, leaving the dragon kingdom of Lugnica without a clear heir. The Council of Sages, guided by the words of the Dragon Tablet, has identified 5 potential royal candidates to compete in a selection process to determine the next ruler. Lady Amelia is one of these 5. 5 candidates, a vacant throne, and a stole. An insignia that could have disqualified one of them right off the bat, Naruto mused, piecing together the political tapestry. Sounds like a recipe for assassination attempts and backroom deals. Is that why she needs a protector? Precisely, Reinhard confirmed, his gaze sharp. Lady Amelia's position is uniquely precarious. She is a half-elf. Naruto's brow furrowed slightly, and that's a problem. In his world, prejudice was typically reserved for those with tailed beasts sealed within them, or for clans with unique and feared abilities. The concept of race-based hatred on such a scale felt both alien and depressingly familiar. A significant one, Reinhard said, his tone heavy. She bears a striking resemblance to the Witch of Envy, a figure of immense hatred and fear in our history. Responsible for nearly consuming the world centuries ago. To many, her silver hair and amethyst eyes are a mark of taboo. They see the witch, not the kind, compassionate woman she truly is. Naruto fell silent, his fingers tapping a soft, contemplative rhythm on the windowpane. He had been the vessel of the 9-tailed fox, a being of pure chakra and immense destructive power. He knew the sting of being judged for something beyond his control, of seeing fear and hatred in the eyes of others. This Amelia, this half-elf candidate, was already more relatable to him than anyone else in this strange world. So she's an outcast, fighting for a throne in a kingdom that hates her on sight, Naruto summarized, his voice losing its light-hearted edge, replaced by a low, resonant steel. And you're putting her in the care of a man you just met in a back alley. I am putting her in the care of a man who neutralized 3 armed thugs without moving from his spot, who calmed a desperate thief with a few words. And who possesses a power I cannot comprehend but can feel is not inherently malicious, Reinhard countered smoothly. My instincts, honed by the divine protection of the Sword Saint, tell me you are a force for stability. Not chaos. I am trusting that instinct. Naruto held his gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. The shinobi's eyes were like the deep ocean, vast and unreadable, while the knight's were like the clear sky, honest and unwavering. It was a meeting of 2 different worlds, 2 different kinds of power, finding a point of mutual respect. Fair enough, Naruto finally conceded. But if anyone tries to hurt her because of who she is, I won't be as gentle as I was with those thugs. The statement was delivered with that same easy smile, but the promise of violence beneath it was as clear and cold as ice. The carriage slowed, turning onto a long, immaculately kept gravel path flanked by towering, ancient trees that formed a dense canopy overhead. After a few more minutes, the trees parted, revealing their destination. The Rosewall Mansion was a breathtaking, ostentatious masterpiece of architecture. It was a sprawling Gothic structure of dark stone and pointed arches, with dozens of windows glinting like multifaceted eyes. It possessed a strange, asymmetrical beauty, looking less like a building that was designed and more like one that had grown organically from the earth. Perfectly manicured gardens, bursting with vibrant, alien-looking flora, surrounded it, but they did little to soften the mansion's imposing, almost menacing, aura. Naruto's enhanced senses, perpetually in a low-level sage mode, kicked into high gear. The very air here was different. It was thick, saturated with a form of energy that was similar to, but distinct from, the nature energy he was used to. It was mana, the lifeblood of this world's magic, and this place was steeped in it. He could feel it humming in the stones of the mansion, flowing through the soil of the gardens, and coalescing in dense pockets within the building itself. It felt ancient, powerful, and strange. There was an undercurrent to it, a subtle dissonance that pricked at his senses. A sour note in an otherwise beautiful symphony. As the carriage rolled to a halt before a grand, oak-carved double door, the doors swung open in perfect synchrony, seemingly of their own accord. 2 figures stood silhouetted in the doorway. They were girls, identical twins, dressed in perfectly tailor-made uniforms. One had short pink hair covering her right eye, the other had blue hair covering her left. They moved with an eerie, practiced unison, bowing deeply as Reinhard stepped out of the carriage. Naruto followed, his feet crunching softly on the gravel. He took in the two maids, his gaze sweeping over them in a single, comprehensive glance. His senses told him far more than his eyes could. Beneath their placid, professional exteriors, he felt a tightly leashed suspicion. The pink-haired one, he sensed, was sharp, observant, her energy a low, steady hum. The blue-haired one, however, was a different story. Her energy was a placid lake on the surface, but deep beneath, he felt a swirling, chaotic vortex of something immense and powerful, carefully suppressed. And intertwined with it was a profound, aching sadness and a fierce, almost fanatical loyalty. "Welcome back, Sir Reinhard," the pink-haired maid said, her voice flat and emotionless. "And welcome, guest. Master Rosewall is expecting you." "Thank you, Ram," Reinhard replied with a polite nod. He gestured towards Naruto. "This is Naruto Uzumaki. He will be staying with us for the foreseeable future. Naruto, this is Ram, and this is Rem." The blue-haired maid, Rem, offered a flawless, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It is a pleasure to meet you, guest Sama." Her voice was a soft, polite melody, but Naruto could feel the steel-taut tension in her, the analytical gaze that was sizing him up, judging him, and finding him wanting. "Just Naruto is fine," he said, giving them a friendly, open smile that he knew they would immediately distrust. "Pleasure to meet you both." He made a point to meet each of their gazes directly, Ram's sharp and dismissive, Rem's cool and guarded. A new presence made itself known. A small, cat-like creature with gray and white fur, a long, fluffy tail, and large, intelligent blue eyes floated down from the archway above. It hovered in the air, its little pink paws crossed, regarding Naruto with intense curiosity. The concentration of mana around it was immense, far purer and more potent than the ambient energy of the mansion. This was a spirit, a being of pure magic. My, what have we here?" The spirit chirped, its voice surprisingly masculine and mature. "Reinhard, you've brought home a stray. And a very strange-smelling one at that." Before Reinhard could make the introduction, a gentle voice called out from within the mansion's grand foyer. "Puck, be nice." A young woman stepped into the light. She was beautiful, with an ethereal grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Long, silver hair cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall, and her large, amethyst eyes held a mixture of innocence and weary determination. She wore a simple but elegant white and purple dress, and the stolen insignia that had started this whole affair was now pinned neatly at her collar. This was Amelia, the half-elf, the royal candidate. Naruto felt a pang of empathy as he looked at her. He saw past the uncanny beauty and the resemblance to this world's dark deity that Reinhard had described. He saw the flicker of apprehension in her eyes, the slight, defensive set of her shoulders. He saw a young woman carrying a burden far too heavy for her, trying her best to be brave in a world that wanted to hate her. "Welcome to my home," Amelia said, her voice soft but clear. She offered Naruto a small, hesitant smile. "Thank you for what you did for Felt. And for recovering my insignia. I'm deeply in your debt." "Think nothing of it," Naruto replied, his tone softening, losing the playful edge he'd used with Reinhard. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Amelia insisted, shaking her head. "No, they wouldn't have. You were kind to her. And you helped me, even though you had no reason to." "That's rare." The spirit, Huck, zipped through the air and ca. me to a halt directly in front of Naruto's face, hovering at eye level. So you're the one. You don't feel like a knight, or a mage. You feel different, like the wind and the trees, but also like a hot stone. What are you? Naruto didn't flinch. He simply looked at the spirit, a genuine curiosity in his own eyes. I'm a shinobi, and a sage. He reached out slowly, not to touch, but as an open gesture. It's a pleasure to meet you. Puck, your energy is very clean. Very powerful. Puck's ears twitched in surprise. Oh, you can feel that. Most humans just get a headache when I'm this close. He floated nearer, sniffing the air around Naruto. Leah is right. You are a good person. I can sense it, but there's a great power sleeping inside you. A very, very great power. Try not to break anything, okay? The spirit gave a playful wink before zipping back to nuzzle against Amelia's cheek. The interaction was observed with silent intensity by all present. Reinhard looked pleased, his gamble seemingly paying off. Amelia's hesitant smile became a little more genuine. Ram's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professional apathy. But it was Rem who Naruto focused on for a split second. Her polite smile had faltered, replaced by a deep-seated, almost instinctual suspicion. His easy acceptance by the great spirit Puck hadn't reassured her, it had made him an even greater anomaly. An unknown quantity, a potential threat. The moment was interrupted by the slow, deliberate clapping of hands from the top of the grand staircase that dominated the foyer. Bravo! What a delightful little gathering we have here. A sword saint, my dear Leah Tan, her ever-vigilant familiar, my two diligent maids, and quadruple A new player has entered the stage. How simply marvelous. The man who descended the stairs was as flamboyant and eccentric as the mansion he owned. He was tall and slender, with long, indigo hair and heterochromatic eyes, one blue, one yellow. His face was painted like a clown's, with teardrop markings under his eyes, and he wore an extravagant outfit of purple and black that looked more like a court jester's costume than a nobleman's attire. This could only be the Margrave, Rosewall L. Mathers. His presence was overwhelming. The mana in the room seemed to bend towards him, drawn to him like iron filings to a magnet. He was, without a doubt, the most powerful magic user in the kingdom. And every fiber of Naruto's being screamed that this man was dangerous. Not just powerful, but cunning. A snake hiding behind a jester's smile. Rosewall glided down the final steps, his strange, sing-song voice echoing in the cavernous hall. He came to a stop before Naruto, looking him up and down with an unnervingly perceptive gaze. So this is the enigma Sir Reinhard has brought to my door, Rosewall purred. Drawing out the vowels. Naruto Uzumaki. An unusual name, for an unusual mon. Tell me, what brings you to our humble corner of the world? Naruto met the Margrave's mismatched gaze without flinching. His own internal sensors on high alert. This was a test. Every word, every gesture was a move in a game he was only just beginning to understand. A happy accident, Naruto replied. His voice even and calm. Reinhard was kind enough to offer me a job. I hear you're in need of someone to help keep Lady Amelia safe. Ah, so direct, so straightforward. Rosewall clapped his hands together again. The sound sharp and jarring. I do so love that. No pretense. No beating around the bush. Very well. Your duties will be simple. Be a shield for my dear Amelia. Protect her from the shadows that wish her harm. In return, this mansion is your home. You shall want for nothing. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though it still carried throughout the silent hall. But I must know, what is your motivation? Why pledge yourself to a cause you only learned of this morning? Surely it isn't simple altruism. This was the core of it. The question of trust. Rosewall was testing his character, his intent. A simple answer wouldn't suffice. He needed one that was both true and disarming. Naruto's expression shifted. The easy-going smile vanished, replaced by a look of quiet, unshakable conviction. Where I come from, I've seen what happens when people are judged and hated for things they can't control. I've seen what that kind of hatred does to people. To nations. Lady Amelia is fighting against that. She's trying to build a better future, not just for herself, but for everyone. That's a cause I can understand. It's a cause worth fighting for. He didn't mention his past as a Jinchuriki. He didn't need to. The raw, absolute sincerity in his voice was more potent than any detailed explanation. It was the kin-d of conviction forged in the fires of war and loss, and it resonated with a power that transcended words. The foyer was deathly silent. Amelia looked at him with wide, stunned eyes, a blush creeping up her cheeks. Reinhard's lips curved into a subtle, satisfied smile. Even Puck seemed to be regarding him with a newfound respect. Roswall stared at him, his painted smile fixed in place, but his heterochromatic eyes held a new, sharp, calculating gleam. He had expected a sellsword, a wanderer, an opportunist. He had not expected a man of principle. A man with a core of adamant. "Ho-oh, fascinating," Roswall finally breathed out, his voice returning to its theatrical drawl. "It seems our little royal selection has just become infinitely more interesting. Welcome, Naruto Uzumaki. Welcome to the Roswall household." He spun around with a flourish. Ram, show our guest to his quarters. Ensure he has everything he needs." "Yes, Master Roswall," the twins said in unison. Rem stepped forward, bowing politely. "This way, guest Sama." The guest Sama was back, the wall of professional distance firmly rebuilt. As Naruto followed the maids up the grand staircase, he could feel Roswall's eyes on his back. A gaze that felt like a physical weight, probing and analyzing. He had passed the first test, but he knew this was only the beginning. This house was a nest of secrets, and he had just walked right into the center of it. The room they showed him to was larger than his entire apartment back in Konoha. It had a large, canopied bed, a polished wooden desk, a fireplace, and a balcony that overlooked the vast, dark forest surrounding the estate. It was luxurious, comfortable, and felt entirely like a gilded cage. "Your meals will be brought to you 3 times a day. Laundry will be taken care of every morning. If you require anything, you need only pull this cord," Ram explained, her tone clipped and efficient, pointing to a silk rope near the bed. She then turned and left without another word. Rem lingered for a moment, performing a final check of the room, straightening an already perfectly straight painting on the wall. The silence was heavy with unspoken questions. Naruto broke it. "You don't trust me." Again, a statement, not a question. Rem stopped what she was doing, her back still to him. "It is not my place to trust or distrust a guest of Master Roswall. It is my place to serve." "That's a well-rehearsed line," Naruto said, his voice gentle. He wasn't mocking her, he was seeing through her. "But that's not what I asked." She turned to face him. Her expression a perfect mask of polite servitude, but her blue eye, the one not hidden by her hair, was as cold and hard as a winter sky. "My sister and I are all we have. This mansion, Master Roswall, Lady Amelia, this is our world. You are an unknown element, guest Sama. Unknown elements can be dangerous. They can also be helpful," Naruto countered softly. He took a step closer, not in a threatening way, but simply to close the distance. He looked down at her, his height advantage significant but his posture entirely non-threatening. He lowered his voice, so only she could hear. "I can sense it, you know. The sadness you carry, the burden, it's heavy." Rem's composure finally cracked, her eyes widened in shock and a flicker of raw fear. Her hand instinctively went to her chest. How could he know? How could this stranger see the carefully hidden wounds she kept locked away in the deepest recesses of her heart? "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's okay," Naruto said, his voice a soothing balm. "You don't have to talk about it. But you should know, you and your sister aren't alone in this house anymore. I'm here now, and I protect the people I care about." He gave her a small, reassuring nod and then turned to look out the balcony window, granting her the space to compose herself. He had planted a seed of doubt in her assessment of him. A seed of curiosity, and perhaps, a tiny, fragile seed of hope. Rem stared at his back, her heart pounding in her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, suspicion, and a strange, unfamiliar emotion that she couldn't quite name. This man, this Naruto Uzumaki, was far more than he appeared. He was dangerous, yes, but perhaps not in the way she had assumed. She bowed stiffly, her movements jerky and uncertain. "If you require anything else, please let me know." She then turned and fled the room, her composure shattered. Alone, Naruto let out a long, slow breath. The sun had set, and the twin moons of this world were beginning to rise, bathing the forest in a pale, silvery light. He closed his eyes, sinking deeper into his sage senses, expanding his awareness beyond the room. Beyond the mansion walls, out into the estate. He could feel them all. Reinhard, already in a carriage and departing. Amelia, in her study, talking quietly with Puck, her anxiety. A low thrum beneath a layer of renewed hope. Rosewall, in what felt like a library, his energy a swirling vortex of amusement and calculation. Ram, in the kitchen, her presence sharp and steady. Henri, he could feel her in the servants' quarters, her emotional state a turbulent storm of fear and confusion. But then, he felt something else. A flicker, an anomaly far beyond the borders of the estate, back towards the capital. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a life force flaring into existence with a jolt of confusion and terror, only to be violently extinguished moments later. It felt similar to the energy of his own summoning, but weaker, more chaotic. His eyes snapped open, a frown creasing his brow. What was that? It felt like a death. A sudden, brutal, and utterly final death. And yet, there was a strange echo to it. A resonance that hinted at something impossible. Naruto stared out into the moonlit darkness, the strange, dissonant note of the mansion's mana and the echo of death. Distant death creating a profound sense of unease within him. He had been in this world for less than a day, and already the mysteries were piling up. He had promised to be a shield. But as he looked out at the dark, whispering forest, he had the distinct feeling that the enemies he would face here were far more complex than simple assassins, and the battles would not be won with fists alone. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Echoes of a Life Twice Lived. The first light of dawn in this new world was a strange, ethereal thing. It filtered through the intricate leaded glass of the balcony doors, SPLI. NTERING into 100 soft pastels that painted the opulent bedroom in shades of rose and lavender. Two moons, one a brilliant silver and the other a faint, ghostly violet, were just beginning their descent in the western sky. It was a beautiful, serene sight, but Naruto Uzumaki felt no peace. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night in a state of deep meditation, seated cross-legged on the plush rug. His senses expanded to their absolute limit. The mansion was a living entity around him, its mana-rich stones breathing in the cool night air. He could feel the soft, rhythmic heartbeats of its CCU pants. Amelia's steady and calm in her sleep, Puck's a faint, dormant spark now that he was resting, Rosewall's a slow, predatory thrum from his chambers, Ram's a sharp, metronomic tick, and Rem's was a troubled sea. Her rest fitful and plagued by the disquiet he had instilled in her. But his focus was not on the mansion. It was on the echo. That fleeting, horrific sensation from the previous evening. The jolt of a life appearing and then being snuffed out like a candle flame. It had been distant, somewhere in the sprawling chaos of the capital, but his sage mode had latched onto it. It was the sheer wrongness of it that gnawed at him. It wasn't just a death. He had felt countless deaths in the war, the fading of chakra signatures, the final exhalation of life. This was different. It was a violation of the natural order, a tear in the fabric of existence that had been violently stitched shut, leaving behind a phantom scar of energy. He had felt something akin to it once before. The moment he and Sasuke had sealed Kagaya Otsutsuki, the sheer cosmic pressure of forcing a being outside of the natural cycle of life and death into a cage. This echo felt like a microscopic version of that, a personal, localized anomaly, and it terrified him more than any army ever could. With a sigh, he rose to his feet, the night's meditation having provided no answers, only deeper questions. The first rule of survival was to know your terrain, and that included its unseen dangers. He had to return to the capital. He had to find the source of that echo. His morning routine began with a series of quiet, fluid katas on the balcony as the twin moons gave way to the rising sun. The movements were a blend of shinobi combat forms and the gentle, flowing exercises for gathering nature energy. It settled his mind, centering him in the here and now. He was a long way from home, adrift in an unknown sea, but his body, his skills, his discipline, those were his anchors. A soft knock at the door signaled the arrival of breakfast. He opened it to find Rem, her expression once again an impeccable mask of politeness, though he could see the faint shadows of a sleepless night under her eyes. She carried a silver tray laden with an assortment of foods that were entirely alien to him. Purple bread, oddly shaped fruits, and a steaming cup of something that smelled vaguely like tea but with a spicy, floral undertone. "Good morning, guest Sama," she said, her voice a soft, practiced monotone. She avoided his eyes, her gaze fixed on a point just over his shoulder. "I have brought your breakfast." "Thank you, Rem," Naruto said, his voice gentle. He stepped aside to let her in. "But I told you, just Naruto is fine." She placed the tray on a small table near the window, her movements precise and efficient. "As you wish, Naruto-sama." A small, almost imperceptible promotion from guest to Naruto. A tiny crack in the armor. He'd take it. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of the strange tea. Her shoulders tensed for a fraction of a second. "I slept sufficiently, thank you for asking." She turned to leave, her duty fulfilled. "Rem," he called out, stopping her at the door. She turned, her hand on the knob. "If something is troubling you, you don't have to carry it alone. That's what comrades are for." Her visible blue eye widened almost imperceptibly. The road, comrades, hung in the air between them. It was a word that implied a bond, a shared purpose, something far beyond the station of a maid and a temporary guest. I will keep that in mind," she whispered, before slipping out of the room and closing the door softly behind her. Naruto took a sip of the tea. It was delicious. He smiled to himself. Breaking through the walls these two had built around themselves was going to be a long campaign, but he was nothing if not patient. He found Amelia in the library, a vast, two-story rotunda filled with thousands of leather-bound books. Sunlight streamed through a high, domed ceiling, illuminating floating dust motes in golden shafts of light. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and vanilla. Amelia was seated at a large, oak table, surrounded by stacks of books on history, law, and political theory. Huck was curled up asleep on a nearby stack, looking like a fluffy, inanimate paperweight. She looked up as he entered, a small, welcoming smile gracing her lips. The anxiety he'd seen in her yesterday was still there, but it was overshadowed by a quiet, fierce determination. "Good morning, Naruto," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, quiet space. "Did you rest well?" Like a log, he lied smoothly, pulling up a chair and sitting opposite her. "What are you up to?" "Light reading." She let out a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Something like that. I'm trying to formulate my platform for the selection. My primary goal is to create a society where everyone is treated equally, regardless of their race or station. But, putting that into practice, into law, is incredibly complex." She gestured tiredly at the piles of books. "I want to be a worthy ruler, not just someone who won by chance. I have to study. I have to be prepared." He looked at her, at the earnest conviction in her amethyst eyes, and felt a surge of respect. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a true believer in her cause, willing to put in the hard, unglamorous work to make it a reality. "Where I'm from," he said, leaning forward, his voice low and serious, "the most respected leaders were the ones who understood their people. Not just from books, but from walking among them, listening to them, sharing their burdens." Amelia looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "That's a beautiful sentiment. But it's difficult for me. When people see me, they don't see Amelia. They see the silver-haired half-elf. They see the witch. Then we'll have to make them see," Naruto stated simply, his confidence a tangible force. "Let me be your eyes and ears. Let me walk in the places you can't. I'll report everything back to you. We'll build your platform not just on theories from old books, but on the real needs and hopes of the people." Her eyes widened, shining with a nascent hope. "You would do that. I told you, I'm your shield," he said with a warm smile. "A shield doesn't just block attacks. It lets you advance without fear." It was in that moment that the dynamic between them truly solidified. He was not just a bodyguard, he was her first true political ally, her first confidant in this monumental undertaking. Their strategic meeting was interrupted by a commotion from the direction of the kitchens, followed by the distinct, acrid smell of something burning. Huck's ears twitched, and he yawned, stretching in midair. "Uh-oh," The spirit mumbled. Sounds like Ram's on cooking duty again. Leah, you might want to prepare for a culinary adventure. Naruto stood up, a curious smile playing on his lips. I think I'll go check it out. He arrived in the kitchen to find it filled with a thin haze of black smoke. Ram stood before a large, cast-iron stove, staring down at a blackened, smoldering pan with an expression of stoic defeat. Rem was frantically waving a towel to dissipate the smoke, a look of resigned exasperation on her face. Sister, I believe the potatoes are beyond saving, Rem said diplomatically. HMPH. They were incooperative, Ram stated, as if the potatoes themselves were to blame for their fiery demise. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Trouble in paradise. The twins turned to him. Ram's expression was one of mild annoyance. Rem's was one of carefully concealed embarrassment. It is nothing that concerns you, Naruto-sama, Ram said dismissively. Lunch is merely delayed. Delayed indefinitely, from the looks of it. Naruto chuckled, pushing off the doorframe and walking into the kitchen. He waved a hand, a small, controlled gust of wind instantly clearing the smoke from the room. The maids stared at him, stunned by the casual display of wind magic. You know, he said, unbuttoning the cuffs of his sleeves and rolling them up to his elbows, revealing muscular, sun-tanned forearms. I've been living on my own for a long time. Had to learn to cook or starve. He walked over to the pantry and began pulling out ingredients with a practiced eye. How about I give you a hand? Ram looked indignant. A guest, cooking in the master's kitchen. It is unheard of. Well, the master can either have an unheard of guest cook him a decent meal, or he can have unheard of charcoal for lunch. His choice, Naruto retorted without missing a beat. He turned to Rem, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Rem, could you get me a clean pan and a cutting board? And maybe show me where you keep the spices. For the next hour, the kitchen became Naruto's domain. He moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. Vegetables were diced into perfectly uniform cubes with a few lightning-fast chops of a knife. He controlled the heat of the stove not with the knob, but with a subtle application of his own chakra, ensuring a perfect, even temperature. He combined the strange, foreign ingredients with an innate sense of what would work, his sage's connection to the natural world extending even to the balance of flavors. The twins watched, utterly dumbfounded. Ram, her pride wounded, stood with her arms crossed, offering curt, unhelpful advice. Rem, however, found herself drawn into his orbit. He asked for her help, handing her spices to grind, asking her opinion on flavor combinations. He didn't treat her like a servant, but like a partner. He spoke to her easily, naturally, telling her amusing, heavily redacted stories about his training, which mostly involved near disasters in his own kitchen back in Konoha. For the first time since he had arrived, Rem felt the wall of suspicion inside her begin to crumble, replaced by a grudging respect and a profound sense of curiosity. This man was a whirlwind of contradictions. A warrior who could cook. A powerful sage who could laugh at his own mistakes. A stranger who felt more present, more real, than anyone she had ever met. When lunch was served, it was a masterpiece. A simple but incredibly flavorful stew, accompanied by perfectly steamed vegetables and the fluffy purple bread, which he had managed to toast to a perfect golden brown without a hint of black. Rosewall, who had appeared as if summoned by the delicious aroma, took one bite and his painted smile widened with genuine delight. My, Naruto-kun. It seems your talents are far more varied than I had imagined. A hidden gem. Perhaps you should take over culinary duties permanently. Ram shot Naruto a glare that could have curdled milk. I'm just happy to help, Naruto said with a shrug, enjoying the look of pure, unadulterated pleasure on Amelia's face as she ate. But today, I have a favor to ask. Rosewall leaned forward, his mismatched eyes glinting with interest. Oh, a favor so soon? I want to go back to the capital, Naruto said. I need to scout the area. Get a feel for the city, the escape routes, the potential ambush points. If I'm going to protect Amelia, I need to know the lay of the land. It was the perfect excuse. Logical, proactive, and directly related to his duties. Rosewall considered it for a moment, tapping a long finger against his chin. A splendid idea, proactive, responsible, I approve. Rem shall accompany you, she knows the capital well and can serve as your guide. Rem, who had been quietly eating, looked up in surprise. Naruto met her gaze across the table and gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. The trip back to Lugnica was quiet. Rem drove the horseless carriage. A ground dragon, she called it, with practiced skill. Naruto sat beside her, his senses fully extended. He was searching, hunting for that lingering scar, that phantom echo of wrongness. As they entered the bustling city streets, he focused his sage mode, sifting through the chaotic symphony of life energies. He ignored the thieves, the merchants, the city guards. He was looking for a ghost. This way, he said suddenly, pointing down a street he'd never been on. Turn here. Rem looked at him, confused. But Naruto-sama, the main market is straight ahead. Trust me, he said, his voice low and intense. There's something I need to see. She hesitated for a moment, then complied, guiding the ground dragon down the less traveled side street. He directed her through a labyrinth of alleys and narrow passages, closing in on a fading residual energy that only he could perceive. It was like following a scent that had gone cold, but the faint trace was still there. He had them stop a block away from a familiar alley. The one where he had met Felt. But his destination was a different alley, just across the street. An even darker, more squalid one. Wait here, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He slipped out of the carriage, his movements silent and fluid, and melted into the shadows of the street. He entered the alley, and the feeling hit him like a physical blow. The wrongness. It was stronger here, faded, but undeniable. This was the place, the spot where that life had been extinguished. He knelt, placing a hand on the grimy cobblestones. He could feel it, the residue of despair, terror, and a profound, cosmic confusion. And then he sensed it. A new energy signature, very close by. It was weak, disoriented, and reeked of that same, specific wrongness. The echo was no longer an echo. It was here. It was now. Naruto moved with silent speed, rounding a corner. He saw a young man, not much older than himself, with black hair and strange, track-suited clothing. The man was on his hands and knees, hyperventilating, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond simple fear. He was staring at the cobblestones, at a spot where Naruto could sense the faintest, darkest stain of old blood. This was him. This was the source. The young man, Subaru Natsuki, looked up, his panicked gaze locking onto the tall, blonde figure who had appeared out of nowhere. He saw a man with an aura of absolute calm and unnerving intensity. Who are you? Subaru stammered, scrambling backwards. Naruto didn't answer immediately. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his cerulean eyes boring into Subaru's. His sage senses were screaming at him. This boy, this strange, terrified boy, he smelled of death. Not the scent of someone who was dying, but the scent of someone who had died. Recently, violently, and was somehow, impossibly, alive again. I should be asking you that, Naruto said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through Subaru's panic-stricken haze. I felt you die yesterday. Right here in this alley. So tell me, how are you still alive? Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Scent of Steel and Shadow. The silence in the grimy alley was a taut, stretched thing, ready to snap. Subaru Natsuki, sprawled on the cobblestones, felt his heart hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. The world, which had just violently reset itself into a semblance of normalcy, was tilting on its axis once again. Before him stood this stranger, this tall, blonde man whose calm was more terrifying than any overt threat. His blue eyes weren't just looking at him, they felt like they were peeling back the layers of his soul, seeing the fresh, grisly stain of his own recent, impossible death. How do you know that? Subaru's voice was a ragged whisper, disbelief warring with primal fear. No one should know. It was his curse, his secret, his solitary nightmare. Before Naruto could press his advantage, a blur of blue and white shot past him, landing silently between him and Subaru. Rem stood in a low, defensive stance, her hands held in front of her, ready to act. A cold, menacing glint of steel peeked from beneath the sleeve of her maid uniform, the head of a chain-linked morning star. Her visible eye was narrowed, fixed on Naruto, her polite demeanor stripped away to reveal the vigilant guardian beneath. Naruto-sama, she said, her voice dangerously level. Please step away from the boy. He is clearly distressed. We should not be threatening civilians. Naruto didn't even glance at her, his focus remaining locked on Subaru. I'm not threatening him, Rem. I'm asking a question, a very important one. He took a half step forward, ignoring the subtle tensing of Rem's muscles, the almost inaudible rattle of her chain. He addressed Subaru again, his voice dropping, losing its hard edge and taking on a tone of intense, unnerving seriousness. I'm not your enemy, but something unnatural is happening to you, and I can sense it. It's like a tear in the world. And you're standing at the epicenter. I felt you die. It felt wrong. Now, tell me how you're here, breathing, scared, and very much alive. Subaru stared, his mind reeling. This man wasn't accusing him, he was describing it. The wrongness, the tear, that was exactly what it felt like. A glitch in reality with him as the unwilling protagonist. He looked from Naruto's impossibly perceptive gaze to Rem's guarded, suspicious one. He had to make them understand. He had to. I call it return by death, he blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in a torrent of panicked confession. I die, and then I wake up. Back at a save point. Before it happened, I was here, in the capital. I met a girl, a silver-haired half-elf. She was looking for a stolen insignia, and we tracked it to a loot house, and we went inside. And, he choked on the memory, the phantom sensation of cold steel sliding through his gut making him gasp. She killed us. A woman, a hunter. She gutted me, and then, I was back. At the apple stand. At the beginning. Rem's expression hardened. She took a half step back, repositioning herself to protect Naruto from this clearly delusional boy. He is speaking nonsense, Naruto-sama. The shock has unhinged him. We should leave him to the city guard. No. Naruto's voice was flat, absolute. He knelt, bringing himself closer to Subaru's level, his presence radiating not a threat, but an unshakable, grounding certainty. He's not lying. Rem stared at him, aghast. But that's impossible. People do not simply return from death. It violates every law of magic and nature. I know a thing or two about violating the laws of nature, Naruto said, his gaze still fixed on Subaru. He could sense it, the faint but undeniable miasma clinging to the boy's soul. It was the scent of the abyss. The cloying aroma of shattered causality. It was alien, an energy signature unlike anything he'd ever felt, but the truth of it was as real as the cobblestones beneath his knees. When he speaks about his death, the energy around him wavers. It's the truth, Rem. A terrifying, impossible truth. He looked Subaru in the eye. This assassin, this loot house, where is it? It's down that way. Subaru pointed a trembling finger deeper into the slums. An old tavern. Big guy runs it, a giant. Rom, I think his name was. He clutched his head. Felt was there. The little blonde girl, the thief. She was the one who stole the insignia. She was supposed to be selling it to the silver-haired girl, to Amelia. But the client who was supposed to pay for it was the assassin. The pieces clicked into place with an audible, terrifying snap. Amelia, felt, the insignia, it all connected. Subaru's past life was this timeline's immediate future. Felt, having been intercepted by Reinhard and having already returned the real insignia, might still be keeping her appointment with the client she thought still had a deal. She was walking into a trap. And the target wasn't just her. It was anyone connected to that insignia. By extension, anyone connected to Amelia. Naruto stood up, all traces of calm contemplation gone, replaced by the sharp, decisive energy of a commander on the battlefield. Rem, we have a problem. A big one. You cannot possibly be taking him seriously. Rem protested, though a seed of doubt was now clearly visible in her expression. The mention of felt, the insignia, and Amelia was too specific to be a madman's raving. I am, Naruto said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Think about it. The timing. The people involved. It's too coincidental. Whether his story about dying is true or not is irrelevant right now. What is relevant is that he has intelligence about a potential assassination attempt on an ally of our faction, happening tonight. We have to act on it. My duty, and yours, is to protect Amelia and her interests. Felt, thanks to Reinhard, is now one of those interests. His logic was flawless, cutting through her skepticism and appealing directly to her sense of duty. Her loyalty to Roswaal and Amelia was absolute. If there was even a 1% chance this lunatic's story could prevent harm to them, she had to take it. She straightened up, the morning star vanishing back into her sleeve with a flick of her wrist. Her demeanor shifted from suspicious guard to professional operative. "What is your command, Naruto-sama?" The "sama" was back, but this time it was different. It wasn't a formality. It was an acknowledgement of leadership. "We're going to that loot house," Naruto declared, his eyes blazing with purpose. "We're not going to wait for an attack. We're going to walk into the spider's web and kill the spider." He turned to Subaru, who was still on the ground, looking up at them with a mixture of terror and awe. "Get up. You're coming with us. You're our guide and our intel. You know what she looks like, what she says, how she moves. You're the most important weapon we have." For the first time, a flicker of something other than fear appeared in Subaru's eyes. A sense of purpose. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a weapon. He scrambled to his feet, wiping his dirt-streaked face on his sleeve. "Right, okay, let's do this." The loot house was exactly as Subaru had described it. A large, dilapidated building that was part tavern, part pawn shop, hunched at the corner of a dark, forgotten street. A crude wooden sign depicting a grinning giant hung precariously above the door. The windows were dark and grimy, and the air around it was heavy with the smell of stale ale, dust, and desperation. Naruto paused in the shadows of the opposite alley, holding up a hand to halt Rem and Subaru. He closed his eyes, his sage senses reaching out, painting a picture of the interior in his mind. "One person inside," he murmured. "Massive. Life energy is strong, steady. Not hostile, just wary. That must be our giant, Rom." He opened his eyes, his strategy already forming. "Okay, new plan. We don't go in guns blazing. We go in as customers. Subaru, you're up front. You're here to see Felt, to confirm the deal. Rem and I will be your backup. Rom is a businessman, not a killer. We need to get him on our side. Let me do the talking." They crossed the street, Naruto's confident stride a stark contrast to Subaru's nervous shuffling and Rem's silent, predatory grace. Naruto pushed open the heavy wooden door. The inside was cavernous and cluttered. Shelves overflowing with junk, stolen goods, and forgotten relics lined the walls. A thick layer of dust coated everything. Behind a massive wooden counter stood a figure that truly lived up to the name, Giant. He was easily over 7 feet tall, with a bald head, a thick, gray beard, and muscles like boulders. He was wiping a mug with a dirty rag, his small, shrewd eyes narrowing as the trio entered. "Closed," Rom grumbled, his voice a low rumble like grinding stones. "Come back tomorrow. We're not here to browse, Gramps," Subaru said, trying to sound tougher than he felt. "We're here for Felt. She has a deal tonight." Rom's eyes narrowed further. He set the mug down with a heavy thud. "I don't know any Felt. Now get out before I throw you out." Naruto stepped forward, moving past Subaru with a disarming smile. The air in the room subtly shifted, the pressure increasing almost imperceptibly. Now, let's not be hasty, Rom-san. We're not here to cause trouble. In fact, we're here to prevent it." Rom's gaze shifted to Naruto. He sized up the blonde man, seeing the easy smile, the strange clothes, but also feeling the immense, coiled power that lay dormant beneath the surface. This was no slum dweller. This was something else entirely. "I'm Naruto. This is Rem, and our jumpy friend here is Subaru," Naruto continued, his tone friendly but firm. "We know Felt was hired to sell a certain insignia. We also know her client is not who they say they are. Her client is an assassin, and they're coming here tonight to kill her and anyone else in this building. We're here to stop that from happening." Rom stared at him, his gruff exterior unreadable. "That's a tall tale. Why should I believe you?" "Because," Naruto said, his smile fading, his eyes becoming deadly serious, "your life depends on it. And because if you don't, I'll have to incapacitate you to keep you from getting in our way. I'd rather not do that. You seem like a decent enough giant." The unspoken threat was perfectly clear. It wasn't a boast, it was a simple statement of fact. Rom, who had lived his life by the law of the strong, recognized the apex predator in the room. He looked from Naruto's unwavering gaze to Rem's cold, ready stance, and then to Subaru's genuine, frantic terror. With a heavy sigh that sounded like a collapsing building, Ram sagged. His shoulders slumping. The girl's not here yet. She's due any minute, he grunted, picking up a massive war hammer from behind the counter. Never liked that client's smell anyway. What's the plan, Blondie? Naruto's smile returned. The plan is simple. We kill the lights. We wait. When she comes in, we hit her, hard and fast. No mercy. The minutes that followed were the most tense Subaru had ever experienced. Ram doused the magical light crystals, plunging the loot house into a thick, oppressive darkness, relieved only by thin slivers of moonlight filtering through the grimy windows. They took up positions. Ram stood like a stone sentinel near the bar. Rem crouched in the shadows of a stairwell, her morning star now held firmly in her hand, the chain wrapped around her arm. Subaru hid behind a pile of crates, his heart threatening to beat its way out of his chest. Naruto stood in the center of the room, perfectly calm, his eyes closed. He was a statue in the darkness, his senses doing the work of his eyes. He could feel the 4 heartbeats in the room, the dust motes in the air, the cold draft coming from under the door. Then, he felt it. A new presence. It appeared outside, moving with an impossible silence. No footsteps, no disturbance in the air. Just a sudden, chilling drop in temperature. The life signature was thin, sharp, and cold as a razor's edge. It was predatory and utterly devoid of hesitation. She's here, Naruto whispered, the sound carrying to his allies in the silent room. The door didn't creak open. It glided, as if pushed by a phantom wind. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the moonlight. A woman, tall and slender, dressed in a form-fitting black outfit that left her midriff bare. She had long, dark hair, and her crimson eyes seemed to glow in the darkness with a hungry light. A sensual, cruel smile played on her lips. This was Elsa Granhired, the bowel hunter. My, she purred, her voice a silken, Ling whisper that sent a tremor of phantom pain through Subaru. Is no one home? I had an appointment. I do hope I haven't been stood up. I get so dreadfully bored when I'm kept waiting. She took another step inside, her hips swaying with a dancer's grace. I'm looking for a little thief. And an insignia. I've come to claim what's mine. That was the signal. Now, Naruto roared, with a bellowing war cry. Ram charged from the darkness, his massive hammer swinging in a deadly arc aimed at crushing Elsa where she stood. Simultaneously, Rem shot out from the stairwell like a cannonball, her morning star a blur of black steel. The chain whistling through the air. Elsa's smile widened into a predatory grin. Oh, a party. How wonderful. She moved. It wasn't human speed. She flowed backwards, dodging Ram's hammer by a hair's breadth, the wind from the blow ruffling her hair. She twisted her body like a contortionist, the spikes of Rem's morning star grazing her side, drawing a thin line of blood but failing to connect solidly. In one fluid motion, she drew 2 long, curved kukri blades that glinted wickedly in the moonlight. You'll have to be faster than that, she giggled, her eyes locking onto Rem. I do love a maid who plays rough. She lunged, her blades a whirlwind of silver death. Rem met her head on, her morning star a devastating defensive weapon, parrying and blocking the flurry of attacks. Sparks flew as steel met steel, the sounds of their battle echoing like a mad blacksmith's forge. Ram, roaring in frustration, tried to find an opening, but Elsa was too fast, too agile. Her movements a deadly dance he couldn't keep up with. Naruto watched from the center of the room, his eyes narrowed in absolute focus. He wasn't just watching, he was analyzing. Her speed was immense, likely augmented by some form of magic or blessing. Her fighting style was unorthodox, self-taught, focusing on disembowelment. She was a sadist, drawing out the fight, enjoying the fear and desperation of her opponents. He saw Rem, despite her incredible skill and tenacity, being slowly pushed back. Elsa was faster, her attacks more relentless. He saw the opening he was waiting for. Elsa, in her bloodlust, overextended, feinting at Ram before spinning to deliver a vicious, gutting slice at Rem. Rem, forced to block a high strike, was left open low. It was the killing blow Subaru had described. Time seemed to slow down for Naruto. He vanished. There was no burst of speed, no blur of movement. One moment, he was in the center of the room. The next, he was directly behind Elsa, his hand clamped around her wrist just as her blade was about to connect with Rem's stomach. The other hand was a blur, striking 2 precise points on her back along the spine. Elsa froze, her body seizing up. Her kukri fell from her limp fingers, clattering loudly on the floor. Her crimson eyes were wide with shock and disbelief. She couldn't move. She couldn't even twitch. It was as if her connection to her own body had been severed. The entire room fell silent, the echoes of the fight fading into nothing. Rom stood panting, his hammer resting on the floor. Rem stared, her morning star held half raised. Her eye wide with utter astonishment, watching as Naruto stood calmly behind the immobilized assassin. Naruto leaned in close to Elsa's ear, his voice no longer warm or friendly. It was as cold and hard as the depths of a frozen lake. The party's over. He effortlessly spun her around to face him, his grip like iron. He looked down into her shocked, furious eyes. Now, you're going to tell me everything. Let's start with a name. Who sent you to kill a candidate for the throne? Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The weight of a name. Elsa Granhiert's world had been reduced to 2 sensations. The iron-hard grip on her arm that felt less like flesh and more like a forged shackle, and the chilling, absolute paralysis that had stolen all command of her body. Her mind screamed, her bloodlust raged, but her limbs were dead weight. Unresponsive appendages. The casual, almost lazy way Naruto had neutralized her was more terrifying than any wound. It wasn't a victory of strength or speed, it was a victory of knowledge. Of a martial artistry so advanced it bordered on the mystical. I believe he asked you a question. Naruto's voice was a low, dangerous rumble, each word resonating with quiet power. He gave her a slight shake. Just enough to rattle her teeth. Who sent you? Elsa's crimson eyes, still wide with shock, now blazed with a defiant, feral fury. A low, guttural growl escaped her lips. The only sound she could manage. Her answer was a spray of bloody saliva aimed at his face. Naruto moved his head a fraction of an inch, the spittle sailing harmlessly past his cheek. His expression didn't change. He simply stared down at her, his cerulean eyes utterly devoid of emotion. Wrong answer. With a single, fluid motion, he shifted his grip, his fingers pressing into a new set of points on her arm and shoulder. A pain unlike anything Elsa had ever known, and she was a connoisseur of pain, erupted through her nervous system. It wasn't the sharp, clean pain of a blade, but a deep, excruciating fire that seemed to burn along her very nerves, setting every fiber of her being alight with agony without leaving a single visible mark. Her jaw, which had been locked in defiance, snapped open in a silent, paralyzed scream. Let's try again, Naruto said, his voice still terrifyingly calm. Who sent you? Rem watched, her morning star held loosely at her side, a mixture of awe and apprehension on her face. This was not the kind, goofy man who had cooked them lunch. This was the warrior he had hinted at being, a shinobi whose methods were chillingly efficient. She saw the absolute control he exerted. The precise application of force designed to extract information, not to indulge in cruelty. It was a cold, professional, and terrifyingly effective display of power. Rom, the giant, leaned on his war hammer. His initial shock giving way to a grudging respect. He had seen countless brawls and back-alley executions, but he had never seen an opponent dismantled so completely, so cerebrally. It was Subaru who finally broke the spell. He crept out from behind the crates, his fear now mixed with a potent, horrified fascination. Dude, what are you doing to her? Naruto glanced at him, his gaze momentarily softening. It's a technique that attacks the nervous system directly. It causes unbearable pain without doing any permanent damage. It's persuasive. He turned his attention back to the writhing, silently screaming Elsa. I can keep this up all day. Or you can give me a name. Your choice. A choked, rasping sound came from Elsa's throat. Melee. She finally forced out, her voice a shredded ruin. Melee. Portrout. The name hung in the air, heavy and unknown. Naruto eased the pressure slightly, allowing the agonizing fire in Elsa's nerves to subside to a dull, throbbing burn. Melee Portrout, is that who hired you? Elsa gasped, taking in shuddering breaths. Yes, hired me, through an intermediary, to retrieve the insignia, and eliminate the half-elf, and anyone associated with her. Why? Naruto pressed. Why does this Melee want Emilia dead? Don't know. Don't care, Elsa hissed, a sliver of her defiance returning. The job was about the thrill, the cutting, the politics are boring. Naruto's eyes narrowed. She was either telling the truth or was a fanatic of the highest order. He sensed no deception in her words, only a chillingly honest apathy towards anything beyond her own sadistic pleasures. This woman was a weapon, not a mastermind. A rabid dog sent to attack a specific target. He now had a name. A thread to pull on. It was enough. Thank you for your cooperation, he said, his voice once again calm. His hand moved in a blur, striking a single point on the back of her neck. Elsa's eyes rolled back into her head, and she slumped forward, completely unconscious. He caught her easily, lowering her to the ground with no more ceremony than setting down a sack of potatoes. He stood up, dusting off his hands. The intimidating aura of the interrogator vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a thoughtful, strategic focus. He turned to the stunned occupants of the room. All right, Phase 1 is complete. The immediate threat is neutralized. He looked at Ram-san, my apologies for bringing this mess to your doorstep. For your trouble, he reached into a small pouch on his hip, one he had discreetly filled with a portion of the stipend from Rosewall, and tossed a heavy purse of gold coins onto the counter. It landed with a satisfying thud. This should cover the damages and keep you quiet about what happened here tonight. Ram's eyes widened at the sight of the gold. It was more than he made in a year. He scooped it up, his massive hand closing around it. For this much coin, I didn't see a thing. Bowel Hunter just tripped and fell down a flight of stairs. Repeatedly, Naruto nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Good. He then turned to Rem. Rem, we need to secure her. We'll take her back to the mansion. Rosewall will want to question her himself. He has methods that are probably even more persuasive than mine. Rem, having shaken off her initial shock, nodded crisply, her professionalism returning. Of course, Naruto-sama. I will retrieve the restraints from the dragon carriage. As she headed for the door, Naruto's gaze fell on Subaru. The boy was staring at the unconscious form of Elsa, his face pale. His body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline and remembered trauma. He had been instrumental in their victory, but the cost was clearly visible on his face. Naruto walked over and placed a heavy, grounding hand on his shoulder. Subaru flinched, then looked up, his eyes wide and haunted. You did good, Subaru, Naruto said, his voice low and sincere. You faced down the thing that killed you and you won. That takes a kind of courage most people can't even imagine. The simple, honest praise seemed to cut through Subaru's haze of horror. It anchored him. I was just hiding behind a crate, freaking out. Quote, you were the canary in the coal mine, Naruto corrected him. You warned us the gas was coming. Without you, we would have walked in blind. Ram, and probably felt would be dead right now. Don't ever discount your role in this. You saved lives tonight. A tear traced a clean path through the grime on Subaru's cheek. He scrubbed it away angrily. It wasn't a tear of fear, but of profound, overwhelming relief. For the first time since being dropped into this insane world, he felt like he had done something that mattered. He wasn't just a helpless victim of a cruel cosmic joke. He had made a difference. The journey back to the Rosewall estate was a surreal affair. The unconscious Elsa Granhire was bound and gagged in the back of the dragon carriage. Her lethal grace reduced to a pathetic, slumped form. Rem drove with a quiet, focused intensity, her gaze occasionally flickering to Naruto in the passenger seat, her mind clearly re-evaluating everything she thought she knew about him. Subaru sat in the back, silent and contemplative, the weight of his impossible reality slowly settling into something more manageable. Naruto, for his part, was a sea of calm. He stared out at the passing landscape, now bathed in the light of the twin moons, his mind already 3 steps ahead. He had a name, Melee Portrout. He had a prisoner. He had a traumatized but invaluable new ally in Subaru. The royal selection was no longer an abstract political game, it was a shadow war, and the first battle had just been won. But victory came with complications. What was he to do with Subaru? The boy was intrinsically linked to Emilia's fate, a living, breathing early warning system. His return by death ability, as terrifying as it was an unbelievable strategic asset. But it was also a horrific burden for one person to bear. Naruto, who had carried the burden of a tailed beast his entire life, recognized the crushing weight of a power that isolates and torments. He wouldn't let Subaru face that alone. When they arrived at the mansion, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. It seemed Roswell's network of information was as impeccable as his flamboyant wardrobe. The Margrave was waiting for them on the front steps, flanked by a curious Amelia and a stoic Ram. Huck floated near Amelia's shoulder, his little arms crossed, his blue eyes sharp and serious. Roswell's painted smile widened as he saw the bound form of Elsa being hauled from the carriage. Ooh my, a party favor, and it's the bowel hunter herself. Naruto-kun, you work FAA oster than I could have ever hoped. Simply MAAA Arvelis. She came to the loot house looking for the insignia, Naruto explained, his voice carrying in the cool night air. Her target was Amelia. She was hired by someone named Meili Portrout. At the mention of the name, Roswell's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. It was a minuscule change, a fleeting flicker in his mismatched eyes. But Naruto's sage senses caught it instantly. He knows that name. Meili Portrout, you say? Roswell purred, recovering his theatrical composure instantly. How very interesting. A name not eared in polite circles for quite some time. It seems an old snake has decided to crawl out of its hole. He clapped his hands together. Ram, take our guest to the special accommodations in the cellar. I will have a chat with her later. The twins moved with eerie efficiency, hauling the unconscious assassin into the mansion. Roswell's gaze then fell upon Subaru, who was hovering awkwardly near the carriage. Looking completely out of place. And who is this little sparrow you've brought back to our nest? Before Naruto could formulate a proper introduction, Subaru, emboldened by his recent victory and Naruto's praise, stepped forward with a surge of misplaced confidence. He struck a dramatic pose, pointing a finger at the sky. The name's Natsuki Subaru, not so helpless bystander, and newly appointed aide to the man who single-handedly saved the day. He declared, grinning. The declaration was met with a stunned silence. Amelia blinked, confused. Ram, who was returning from the cellar, raised a single, unimpressed eyebrow. Roswell's smile became strained. Naruto let out a long, weary sigh and face-palmed. He had praised the boy, given him confidence, and in doing so had apparently created a small, boisterous monster. He was instrumental in stopping the assassin, Naruto explained, trying to salvage the situation. His unique perspective gave us the forewarning we needed. He's with me. Amelia, ever kind, offered Subaru a gentle, welcoming smile. Well, Natsuki Subaru, if you helped protect us, then you have my deepest thanks. Her gaze flickered to Naruto, her amethyst eyes shining with a gratitude and admiration that was so potent it was almost a physical force. Thank you, Naruto. You didn't just protect me. You proactively sought out and eliminated a threat. I don't know what to say. Just doing my job, Naruto said with a slight shrug, though her sincere gratitude warmed him more than he would admit. Nonsense. Roswell boomed, stepping forward and placing a hand on Naruto's shoulder. This was beyond the call of duty. This was a masterful stroke of preemptive defense. You have proven your worth tenfold in a single day. His mismatched eyes gleamed. As a reward, and as recognition of your expanded role, I am officially promoting you. You are no longer merely a guest or a guard. You are now the chief strategist and head of security for the Amelia camp. Your authority in matters of defense will be second only to my own. The announcement was a political bombshell. It elevated Naruto from a hired sword to a key figure in the royal selection. It was a public declaration of trust and power. Naruto looked at Roswell, seeing the calculating intelligence behind the jester's mask. This wasn't just a reward. This was Roswell binding him closer to the cause, giving him more responsibility, and in doing so, ensuring he was too invested to ever walk away. It was a shrewd, political move, and Naruto recognized it for what it was. But it also aligned perfectly with his own goals. I accept, Naruto said simply. A comfortable bed and a hot meal were arranged for Subaru, who, after the adrenaline wore off, practically collapsed from exhaustion. Naruto, however, felt a pull to a different part of the mansion. He found himself walking the quiet, moonlit halls, his senses leading him to the servants' quarters. He found Rem standing on a small, stone balcony, staring up at the two moons. She had changed out of her battle-dirtied uniform and into a simple nightgown, her blue hair looking soft in the pale light. She wasn't wearing her usual maid's headdress. And for the first time, he could see her face completely. He could see the matching set of horns that lay dormant on their foreheads. He could see that she was beautiful. She turned as he approached. Not with suspicion, but with a quiet awareness. "I could not sleep," she said, her voice soft, stripped of its formal cadence. "Me neither," Naruto admitted, leaning against the railing beside her. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the chirping of night insects and the distant whisper of the wind in the forest. "I was wrong about you," Rem said finally, her gaze fixed on the larger of the two moons. "I judged you. I saw you as a threat, an unknown. I apologize." "Nothing to apologize for," Naruto replied gently. "You were just being cautious. Protecting your family. I can respect that." "It was more than caution," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "It was fear. You are so powerful. The way you stopped Elsa, the pain you inflicted, it was terrifying. But you were not cruel. You did what was necessary, and nothing more. And the way you spoke to Subaru-kun, you were kind." Her hand clenched into a fist at her side. "My sister and I, we have seen what true, monstrous power looks like. We have seen what it does to people. It twists them. It corrupts them. But you wield an immense power, yet you remain gentle." She turned to face him, her blue eyes, now clear and full of a raw, vulnerable sincerity, searching his. "Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki?" Truly, Naruto looked at her, at the genuine, heartfelt question, the pain and history he could sense swimming in the depths of her eyes. He saw the faint, ghostly outline of a single horn on her forehead, a mark of her Oni heritage, a source of power and immense sorrow. He knew, with a sage's intuition, that her past was intertwined with that power, with that monstrousness she spoke of. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not all of it, but he could give her a piece of it. A piece that mattered. "I'm a man who was once seen as a monster myself," he said, his voice a low, somber whisper. "I had a power inside me that I didn't ask for, a power that made people hate me and fear me. I spent my whole life fighting. Fighting to be seen, fighting to be accepted, fighting to protect the people who scorned me." He turned his gaze to the moons, a distant, melancholic look in his eyes. "I learned that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure and still be willing to protect others. It's about shouldering the hatred and still choosing to be kind." He looked back at her, and his eyes were filled with a profound empathy that transcended words. "I know what it's like to be afraid of the power inside you, Rem. But that power doesn't define you. Your choices do." Quote. A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of a deep, resonant understanding. In that moment, in the pale light of the twin moons, the last of her walls crumbled into dust. She wasn't looking at a guest, or a strategist, or even a hero. She was looking at the first person who had ever seen the monster she feared herself to be. And had not flinched. Instead, he had offered her not pity, but kinship. The bond between them, forged in the heat of battle and solidified in the quiet of the night, had changed. It was no longer one of maid and master, or even of allies. It was something deeper, something new, something that would undoubtedly make the intricate, dangerous dance of the royal selection even more complicated. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Door to the Forbidden and the Voice in the Dark. The sun rose on a mansion that felt fundamentally altered. The air, usually thick with a placid, ancient magic, now held a sharp, electric undercurrent of tension and secrets laid bare. It was the quiet hum after a lightning strike, a silence that was more profound for the violence that had preceded it. Naruto sat on his balcony, not in meditation, but in quiet contemplation, watching the two moons finally surrender to the dawn. The name, Meili Portrout, was a stone dropped into the placid pool of his understanding of this world. And the ripples were spreading in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. Rosewall's flicker of recognition was the key. The Margrave knew more, far more, than he was letting on. Down the hall, Subaru Natsuki awoke with a gasp, his body still convinced it was about to be torn apart. He sat bolt upright in the ridiculously comfortable guest bed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The silk sheets, the ornate canopy, the soft morning light, it was all real. The loot house, the smell of blood, Elsa's sadistic giggle, that was real, too. But he had survived. More than that, he had won. The thought sent a giddy, unfamiliar thrill through him. He wasn't a victim. He was Natsuki Subaru, aide to the chief strategist. He had a title and everything. He bounded out of bed, feeling a surge of protagonist-level energy. He was part of the team now. He had a place. He got dressed in his now famous tracksuit, the only clothes he had, and practically skipped down to the dining hall. Ready for his first official day as a member of the Amelia camp. The scene that greeted him, however, was far more somber than his mood. Amelia, Naruto, and Rosewall were already seated at the grand dining table. The breakfast spread was as lavish as ever, but no one was eating. A map of Lugnica was spread across the table, and the atmosphere was as heavy as a funeral shroud. "Ah, our little sparrow awakens," Rosewall trilled, his sing-song voice cutting through the tension, though it lacked its usual effervescent quality. "Come, Subaru-kun, join our first council of war." Subaru's bravado deflated slightly. He slid into a chair, suddenly feeling very out of his depth. Naruto gave him a small, encouraging nod, which helped steady his nerves. "As I was saying," Naruto continued, his voice calm and authoritative, bringing the meeting back into focus, "our prisoner is a valuable asset, but she's only a weapon. The hand that wields her is the true enemy. Meili Portrout, Rosewall Sama." He addressed the Margrave directly, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "You recognize the name. Tell us what you know." Rosewall delicately picked up a teacup, his long fingers caressing the fine porcelain. "A name from a fallen house, Naruto-kun. The Portrouts were minor nobles, known for their unsavory pursuits. Masters of demonic beast taming, dabblers in forbidden curses. They were purged generations ago for treason against the crown. I am surprised to hear the name resurface. It is a ghost from the past. A ghost that hires the bowel hunter to assassinate a royal candidate." Naruto countered, his voice flat. "That's more than a simple haunting. That's a declaration of war. What connection did they have? Who were their allies? What was the nature of their treason?" Naruto's direct, relentless questioning seemed to amuse Rosewall. The Margrave's painted smile widened. "So many questions. Such a thirst for knowledge. I adore it. But the answers are buried in history, my boy. Locked away. Then we need to start digging," Naruto stated simply. He turned his attention to the second, more pressing issue. He looked at Subaru. And then there's him. Subaru, who had been trying to make himself as small as possible, suddenly found all eyes on him. "Me, your ability, Subaru," Naruto said, his tone serious but not unkind. "Return by death. It is the single greatest strategic advantage we could ever possess. It's also the most dangerous and horrifying curse I've ever encountered. We know nothing about its rules, its limits, or its origin. If we are to use it, and we must use it, we need to understand it." Amelia looked at Subaru with deep, compassionate eyes. "Subaru-kun, we won't force you to do that. It's horrible, but it's necessary." "Amelia Tan," Naruto said gently, using the affectionate honorific to soften the hard truth. "Our enemies are moving in the shadows. They have already tried to kill you once. They will try again. Subaru's ability allows us to see their moves before they make them. It's our only true counter to an enemy we can't see." He looked at Subaru. "But I will not ask you to walk that path alone. We will figure this out together." Subaru felt a lump form in his throat. Naruto wasn't just talking about him as a tool. He was acknowledging the horror of it, the sacrifice, and offering to share the burden. It was more than anyone had ever done. "Oh okay," he managed to say. "Whatever you need." Rosewall clapped his hands together, the sound echoing in the tense room. "Wonderful. A consensus. Then it is settled. We must analyze both our prisoner and our new, unique asset. And for such specialized and esoteric problems, there is only one place in this mansion to turn." He stood up with a theatrical flourish. We must consult the guardian of the forbidden library. We must ask Beatrice. A palpable shift occurred in the room. Amelia looked intrigued, while Rem and Ram, who had been standing silently by the wall, exchanged a brief, unreadable glance. A forbidden library? Subaru asked, his otaku heart skipping a beat. Is it full of, like, ancient grimoires and ultimate spells and stuff? Something like that, Rosewall chirped, but finding it is the first test. It does not stay in one place, you see. It chooses who is worthy of entering its halls. Follow me. The Margrave. Led them out of the dining hall and down a long, portrait-lined corridor. He stopped in front of a perfectly ordinary-looking wooden door, identical to a dozen others they had passed. The library has a special connection to me. Its contractor, Rosewall explained. And so, it is often drawn to my presence. Rem, my dear, would you do the honors? Rem stepped forward, placed her hand on the doorknob, and opened the door. Inside was a small, dusty broom closet. She closed the door with a sigh. It seems she is not in a welcoming mood today, Master Rosewall. Fickle as ever, Rosewall sighed dramatically. He turned to Amelia. Leah Tan, perhaps your pure heart will entice her. Amelia tried the door. Another broom closet. Subaru, puffing out his chest, stepped forward. Leave it to the protagonist. It's probably based on, like, sheer willpower or something. He grabbed the knob, closed his eyes, and concentrated with all his might before flinging the door open, revealing the same broom closet. Rosewall chuckled. It seems your willpower is insufficient, Subaru-kun. Naruto had been standing back, his eyes closed, his senses extended. He wasn't looking for a door. He was feeling for a signature. A concentration of mana that was powerful, ancient, and profoundly lonely. It was a pocket dimension, stitched into the fabric of the mansion, and its anchor point was a living being. The door wasn't a physical object. It was a metaphysical gateway, and it drifted through the mansion, tethered to the whims of its keeper. He could feel it now, a subtle distortion in the space-time of the hallway. The door Rosewall had chosen wasn't random, it was close. But the gateway wasn't quite aligned. He walked past them, further down the hall, to another, identical door. Try this one. Rosewall's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Naruto hadn't even tried the other doors. He had simply walked to this one with absolute certainty. Naruto placed his hand on the cool, brass knob. He didn't just turn it. He channeled a tiny, infinitesimal thread of his own sage energy into the wood, not as a key, but as a greeting. I see you, the energy whispered. I feel your solitude. I mean you no harm. He opened the door. There was no broom closet. Instead, a wave of air, thick with the scent of ancient paper, ozone, and a faint, cloying sweetness, washed over them. The doorway opened into a room that defied logic. It was a library of impossible scale. Bookshelves stretched up into a swirling, purple-black void where a ceiling should be, each shelf crammed with countless tomes of every shape and size. Floating platforms and spiraling staircases connected different sections, all bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of floating light crystals. In the center of the room, on a small, elevated platform, sat a step stool. And on that step stool sat a little girl. She looked no older than 12, with long, cream-colored hair styled into two massive, drill-like pigtails. She wore an elaborate, frilly pink dress with matching ribbons, and held a thick, leather-bound book in her lap. Her eyes, a mesmerizing kaleidoscope of blue and pink pupils shaped like butterflies, narrowed as she looked at the intruders. It took you long enough. Bubby, she said, her voice dripping with an ancient, weary arrogance. And you've brought strays into my library, I suppose. How very troublesome. This was Beatrice, the great spirit and guardian of the forbidden library. Ah, my dear Biko. Always so welcoming. Rosewall glided into the room. We have a problem that requires your unique expertise, I'm afraid. Beatrice's gaze drifted over the group, dismissing Rosewall, Amelia, and the maids with a familiar boredom. Her eyes then fell on Subaru. Her nose wrinkled in disgust. What is this foul stench? She exclaimed, slamming her book shut. Bubby, you reek of the witch. Get this walking miasma out of my sight at once, in fact. Subaru recoiled as if struck. Witch, what are you talking about? I just took a bath yesterday. Beatrice pointed a trembling finger at him. You are covered in her scent. The lingering jealousy, the possessive shadow. I will not have one of her thralls tainting my sacred archives. Leave. The magical pressure in the room skyrocketed. The air grew thick and heavy, and the books on the shelves began to rattle. Naruto moved, stepping in front of Subaru, shielding him. He met Beatrice's furious, butterfly-pupiled gaze, and the pressure washing over him might as well have been a summer breeze. He's not her thrall, Naruto said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the spirit's rising anger. He's her victim. There's a difference. Beatrice faltered, her fury momentarily checked by his absolute calm. Her eyes, for the first time, focused on him. On this tall, blonde man who had opened her door without permission, who stood unbowed by her power, and who now presumed to lecture her. And who are you, I suppose? She sniffed, trying to regain her superior footing. Another one of Bubby's brutish pets. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said simply. He took in the entire room, the infinite books, the void above, the lonely girl on her step-stool throne. He saw it not as a magical archive, but as a gilded cage. And you are Beatrice, great spirit, guardian of this library for 400 years. Beatrice's eyes widened in genuine shock. How could you possibly know that, in fact? Her age, her contract, that was not common knowledge. I can feel it, Naruto said softly, his sage senses connecting with the ancient, stagnant mana that permeated the room. All of it flowing from her. I can feel the weight of the years you carry. It must be very lonely in here. His words struck a chord deep within her that no one had ever touched. Not Rosewall with his contracts and games. Not Amelia with her hesitant kindness. He wasn't looking at the powerful spirit or the bratty girl. He was looking at the prisoner. Beatrice's composure cracked. She looked away, a faint blush on her cheeks. Don't be absurd. I prefer the quiet, I suppose. It is far superior to the noise of bothersome simpletons. Naruto smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. He had his opening. We need your help. Beatrice-sama, we have two problems. The first is a woman who has been paralyzed by a technique she has never seen before. He gestured to himself. My technique. He briefly explained his method of attacking the nervous system, the flow of energy, the disruption of signals between brain and body. Beatrice listened, her initial arrogance replaced by a scholar's intense, analytical curiosity. That is not mana, she murmured, her butterfly eyes wide. It is not a curse, nor a hex. It is not yin magic. It is a manipulation of the body's own life force. Phi. Sakal art that mimics the effects of the highest level spiritual magic. How is that possible? The second problem, Naruto continued, gesturing to Subaru, is him. He bears the scent of the witch Beck. He is afflicted with a curse that brings him back to life every time he is killed. We believe it is connected to her. Beatrice physically recoiled again, but this time her disgust was mixed with a horrified fascination. Return. By death, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. That is not a curse. That is the witch's personal, possessive, twisted form of love. She has chosen him, branded him. He is her favorite toy. She shuddered. I cannot remove it. No one can. To even try would be to invite her direct attention, and that is a fate worse than any death, in fact. While she couldn't offer a cure, she had given them something just as valuable, a name for Subaru's condition, and a chilling insight into its nature. It wasn't a random ability. It was a mark of possession by the most feared entity in their world's history. I see, Naruto said, his expression grim. Then we won't ask you to remove it. But we will need your knowledge. In this library, there must be records of the witch cult, of their members. Their methods. The name Meili Portrout has resurfaced. We need to know who she is and what she's planning. Beatrice hesitated. Helping them meant taking a side. It meant stepping out of her centuries of passive observation. But this strange man, Naruto, he had seen her. Truly seen her. And his impossible technique was a puzzle her scholarly mind desperately wanted to solve. Digging through dusty old records is a bother, I suppose, she said, trying to sound reluctant. But she snapped her fingers, and a thick, dust-covered tome flew off a high shelf and landed neatly in her hands. The Portrout family was known for creating mabeasts. They had a particular fondness for a species called garless hounds. They were wiped out for attempting to assassinize the royal family of their time. The records say the main family line was extinguished. If Amélie Portraut exists, she is either a survivor hiding in the shadows, or someone has taken up the name. He tossed the book onto the floor in front of Naruto. This is all I will help you with for now. The rest is your problem, I suppose. Now leave. Your combined presence is giving me a headache. In fact, with a wave of her hand, a powerful, unseen force began to push them all towards the door. Thank you for your help, Biko. Roswaal called out as he was ushered from the room. Naruto was the last to leave. He paused at the doorway and looked back at the little girl on her lonely throne. We'll be back, Beatrice. Don't make promises you can't keep, contractor of none, she huffed, turning her back on him and burying her face in another book. But as the door closed, plunging her back into her silent, timeless world, she allowed herself a small, secret smile. For the first time in a very long time, something interesting had happened. Back in the hallway, the group stood in silence, processing what they had learned. Roswaal's painted smile was gone, replaced by a look of cold, calculating seriousness. So, the Bowel Hunter and a new Portraut are working together. This is the work of the witch cult, no doubt. They wish to disrupt the royal selection and throw the kingdom into chaos. He turned, his flamboyant mannerisms returning as he began to walk down the corridor. I believe it is time for my chat with our guest in the cellar. I will see if she can shed any more light on this Meilei's location or affiliations. His voice was light, but the menace beneath it was a palpable, chilling thing. Amelia shivered, and even Subaru looked unnerved. Naruto's expression was grim. I'll come with you. No, Roswaal said, not even turning around. This is a conversation best had between two connoisseurs of the art, wouldn't you agree? You are head of security, Naruto-kun. Your place is to secure the perimeter. Please ensure no one disturbs us. It was a command disguised as a request. Roswaal was going to do things to Elsa that he did not want Naruto, with his warrior's code and empathetic nature, to witness. He was drawing a line. Naruto watched him go, his jaw tight. He understood. This was the dark, ugly side of politics and war. The side he had always tried to avoid, but knew was sometimes necessary. He escorted Amelia and Subaru back to the main hall, assuring them that everything was under control, before making his way down to the mansion's cold, damp cellar. He didn't enter the reinforced room where they were holding Elsa. He stood outside the thick, oak door, fulfilling Roswaal's command to the letter. He stood guard, and he listened. With sage mode, he didn't need his ears. He could feel everything. He felt Roswaal enter the room. He felt the Margrave's mana, usually a controlled, theatrical swirl, coalesce into something sharp, precise, and infinitely cruel. He heard no screams. Roswaal's magic was clearly too sophisticated for that, but he felt the waves of pure, undiluted terror rolling off Elsa. It was a terror that dwarfed what she had felt during his own interrogation. He felt the systematic dismantling of her mind, the peeling back of her psyche, the targeted application of agony-inducing spells that left no mark but shattered the soul. It was a masterclass in magical torture, performed by a virtuoso of pain. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, a silent, stone-faced guardian to an act of necessary evil, the chilling reality of his new position settling upon him like a shroud. He was a strategist in a shadow war, and this was the price of information. Finally, the waves of terror ceased. There was a long silence, and the heavy bolt on the door was drawn back. Roswaal stepped out, his clown-like makeup perfectly intact, his flamboyant clothes unruffled. He adjusted his cuffs, and his painted smile was back in place. As if he had just come from a pleasant tea party. But his mismatched eyes held a cold, satisfied light that made Naruto's skin crawl. She was surprisingly resilient, Roswaal chirped, his voice dripping with false cheer. But ultimately, quite cooperative. It seems our dear Meili Portraut has a fondness for a particular forest on the border of my domain. A place known as the Forest of Demonic Illusions. He tapped a finger to his lips. It is where she keeps her pets. And it is where Elsa's intermediary is scheduled to meet her in 3 days' time. He had it. The next move. The location of the enemy. One through methods Naruto found repulsive but undeniably effective. Naruto looked past Roswaal, his gaze fixed on the dark, silent cellar door. He had his orders. He had his target. The board was set, and in 3 days, he would lead his small, strange team into the heart of an enemy's territory. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Forest of Lost Things. The 3 days leading up to the mission were a crucible of intense, focused preparation. The Rosewall Mansion, once a place of quiet, aristocratic routine, transformed into a military staging ground under Naruto's command. The atmosphere was thick with a new kind of energy, not the lingering dread of the assassin, but the sharp, purposeful hum of an impending offensive. Naruto, now fully embracing his role as chief strategist, became the undeniable center of this new gravity. He spent the first day with Rem, not in the kitchen, but in the mansion's expansive training yard. He needed to understand her limits, her strengths, the nature of her Oni power. He had sensed its immense, chaotic potential, but he needed to see it, to quantify it. "I want you to come at me with everything you have," he told her, standing in the center of the yard. His posture relaxed but his senses on high alert. "Don't hold back. Don't worry about hurting me. Just show me what you can do." Rem hesitated, her morning star held loosely in her hand. "Naruto-sama, my full power. It is not something I can easily control. It is destructive. I could hurt you." "You won't," he said, his confidence absolute. "But I need to know what I'm working with. If we're walking into a mabeast nest, I need to know the power of the weapon at my side." His words, his unshakable belief in her, in his own ability to handle her, was the final push she needed. She took a deep breath, her demeanor shifting. The polite maid vanished, replaced by a warrior. A faint, ethereal glow surrounded her, and from the center of her forehead, a single, ivory-white horn spiraled into existence. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. Her mana signature, normally a deep, placid lake, erupted into a raging, volcanic torrent. The air grew cold, and the ground around her feet frosted over. Her visible blue eye glowed with an eerie, cerulean light, and her physical strength and speed magnified tenfold. She was no longer Rem the maid, she was Rem, the last of the Oni clan. With a guttural roar that was utterly alien coming from her, she charged. She moved like a blue comet, the ground cracking under her feet. Her morning star was no longer just a blunt weapon. It was a devastating extension of her rage, each swing carrying enough force to pulverize solid stone. Naruto didn't move from his spot. He simply met her assault. He didn't use his overwhelming power. His Rasengans or his tailed beast modes. He used pure, unadulterated taijutsu, the shinobi art of hand-to-hand combat. He became a whirlwind of motion, a study in redirection and flawless defense. He flowed around her attacks like water, his palms, elbows, and feet becoming a blur as he deflected the devastating blows of her morning star, parried her lightning-fast strikes, and used her own momentum against her. It was a dance of beautiful, terrifying violence. The Ona's raw, untamed power against the shinobi's perfect, disciplined skill. Rem was a hurricane. Naruto was the unshakable mountain at its center. He didn't just defend, he analyzed. He saw how her rage fueled her power but also clouded her judgment. He saw the slight tells in her movements, the moments of hesitatio. And before she unleashed her strongest attacks, he saw the toll the transformation took on her body, the fine tremors of exhaustion she tried to hide. After nearly an hour of relentless, high-intensity combat, Rem finally collapsed. Her horn receding, her body slumping to the ground in a trembling heap. She was panting, drained, defeated. Naruto stood over her, not even breathing heavily. He knelt, offering her a waterskin. His expression not one of victory, but of profound understanding. "Your power is incredible, Rem," he said, his voice sincere. "It's like a force of nature. But you let your anger control it. You fight with your heart, not your head. We need to work on that. Power without control is just a tantrum." For the rest of the day, he didn't spar with her. He taught her, he showed her breathing exercises to maintain her calm in the heat of battle. He walked her through katas designed to focus her energy, to channel her power into precise, controlled strikes rather than wild, sweeping blows. He was no longer just her ally, he had become her sensei. And Rem, for the first time in her life, found someone who wasn't afraid of her Oni blood, but saw it as a gift to be honed, a tool to be mastered. Her admiration for him deepened into something far more potent, a student's devotion. His second day was spent with Subaru. They didn't train physically. They sat in the forbidden library, much to Beatrice's vocal but secretly pleased annoyance. If we're going to understand your curse, Naruto began, spreading a large sheet of parchment on the table, we need data. We need to establish a baseline. Every time you return, I need you to tell me everything. The exact time and place you reappear. Who was present? What you were doing right before you died. What you remember of the death itself. Every single detail, no matter how insignificant it seems. Subaru paled at the thought of cataloging his own deaths, but he saw the grim necessity in Naruto's logic. Okay, I can do that. Beatrice, Naruto said, turning to the spirit who was pretending to read a book but was listening to every word. Is there any magic, any artifact, that can detect or interfere with a spatial or temporal anomaly on a personal scale? Beatrice, after a requisite amount of huffing about being treated like an encyclopedia, admitted, there are certain crystals attuned to the flow of mana that might flicker or change color in the presence of a large-scale temporal distortion, I suppose. But for something as specific and personal as his brand, it is unlikely they would register anything. The witch's magic is subtle. It does not obey the known laws. In fact, it was a long shot, but it was something. They spent the day with Beatrice grudgingly guiding them through ancient texts, searching for any mention of similar phenomena, any legend of a curse that defied death. They found nothing, but the process itself was invaluable. It forced Subaru to confront his ability analytically, to begin thinking of it not just as a source of trauma, but as a puzzle to be solved. Naruto taught him memory-enhancing techniques, ways to organize his thoughts under pressure, to become a reliable intelligence asset rather than a panicked victim. He was forging the boy into a tool, yes, but he was also giving him the mental armor to wield it without shattering. The third day was for strategy. Naruto gathered his team, Rem, Subaru, and a reluctant but intrigued Ram, whom he insisted join them, in the war room. He unrolled a map of Rosewall's domain, with the forest of demonic illusions marked in a menacing red circle. According to Rosewall, the forest is known for its powerful hallucinatory properties, likely caused by a native species of pollen-emitting flora, Naruto explained, his finger tracing the perimeter of the woods. It's designed to disorient and confuse. We can't trust our senses in there. We navigate by map, compass, and dead reckoning only. He looked at Ram. Ram, your synesthesia allows you to share senses with those you have a connection with. Correct. Ram nodded, surprised he knew the specifics of her rare ability. Yes, with Rem. Good, Naruto said. If you stay here at the mansion, you can be our eyes in the sky. If Rem and I get separated or become disoriented, you can serve as our anchor, our guide. You will be our mission control. Ram's eyes widened slightly. She was being given a crucial, active role, one that utilized her unique skills from a safe distance. It was a masterful stroke of personnel management, making her feel valued and essential without putting her on the front lines, where her lack of combat prowess would be a liability. He then turned to Subaru. Subaru, you're our ace in the hole. You will stay with Ram. If, and only if, you feel Ram lose her connection with Rem. Or if we don't report back by the designated time, it means we've failed. It means we're dead. That's when your job begins. You will have to reset. And when you come back, you will have the intel of our failure. You will know their traps, their numbers, their location. Your first and only priority upon returning is to get that information to me. The room fell silent. Naruto had just calmly and rationally weaponized Subaru's death. He'd made it a core component of their strategy, a fail-safe. It was chilling, but it was also brilliant. Subaru swallowed hard, the weight of his responsibility settling on him, but he nodded, his expression grimly determined. As dawn broke on the fourth day, the mission began. Naruto and Rem, dressed in dark, practical traveling clothes, stood at the edge of the forest. The trees within were gnarled and ancient, their branches twisting together to form a dense, light-blocking canopy. A faint, sweet-smelling mist clung to the ground, and the air was unnaturally still. It felt like walking into a place that was dreaming. Remember the plan, Naruto said, his voice low. We move fast and quiet. We engage no beasts unless absolutely necessary. We find the meeting point, we neutralize the intermediary, and we capture melee. Trust my senses over your own. And stay close. Rem nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of her morning star. The training had changed her. She moved with a new confidence, her power a controlled, steady hum beneath the surface, no longer a raging storm. They stepped into the forest, the world behind them seemed to vanish. The mist swirled around them, carrying the sweet, cloying scent of the illusion pollen. Almost immediately, the world began to warp. The trees seemed to shift and sway when they weren't looking. Whispers echoed from empty spaces. Strange, fleeting shadows danced at the edge of their vision. Rem's eyes widened, her grip on her weapon tightening. Naruto-sama. The path, it's gone. Naruto didn't even look. His eyes were closed. Ignore it, Rem. It's not real. Focus on my footsteps. Listen to the sound of my breathing. I'm your anchor. He was a rock in a sea of illusion. His sage mode allowed him to feel the truth of the world beneath the hallucinatory overlay. He could feel the solid ground, the true position of the trees, the flow of the wind. The forest's magic was a cheap parlor trick to a mind that could commune with the very soul of nature. He moved with an unerring sense of direction, a compass guided by the planet itself. They traveled for hours through the disorienting, dreamlike landscape. They saw horrifying beasts, creatures of nightmare with too many legs and mouths filled with needle-like teeth, but Naruto guided them along paths that bypassed their lairs. His senses were a perfect early warning system. Finally, he held up a hand, stopping them in a dense thicket of black-barked trees. "We're close," he whispered. "There's a clearing ahead. 2 life signatures. One is human. The other is small, but it feels wrong. Vicious." They crept forward, moving with a silence that was a testament to their shinobi and oni training. They peered through the leaves into a small, circular clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a young girl who looked no older than Beatrice. She had dark purple hair tied in pigtails and wore a frilly, gothic Lolita-style dress. She had a disturbingly cheerful, vacant smile on her face. This had to be Meili Portrout. At her feet sat a small, puppy-like creature with fluffy white fur and big, innocent black eyes. It wagged its tail happily. Standing opposite her was a tall man in a dark cloak, his face hidden in shadow. "The intermediary. Do you have the payment?" Meili asked, her voice a sing-song. Childish treble that was profoundly unsettling. "The cult is pleased with Elsa's work, even if she was indisposed," the cloaked man said, his voice a low rasp. He held out a heavy-looking briefcase. "But we are displeased that the target still lives. And the insignia remains with her. Elsa Onichan is strong, but that new guard at the mansion is stronger," Meili chirped, petting her puppy. "He's interesting. He broke my curse on the Ulgarms at the edge of the forest. Just walked right through it. My puppies couldn't even see him." Naruto's eyes narrowed. So she had already tried to stop them. That explained the beasts they'd bypassed. "Your failure is not our concern," the cloaked man rasped. "The master is growing impatient. Lord Patelgius demands results. If you cannot handle this, we will find someone who can." At the name, Patelgius, Meili's cheerful demeanor faltered. A flicker of genuine fear crossed her face. "No, I can do it. I will do it. I'll send all my puppies to the mansion. I'll tear it down. I'll bring you the half-elf's head myself." "See that you do," the man said. He placed the briefcase on the ground and turned to leave. That was the signal. "Now," Naruto whispered. Rem exploded from the thicket. She moved with the controlled, focused rage they had practiced, her horn sprouting, her power surging not in a wild wave, but in a concentrated spear of force. She was on the cloaked man in an instant, her morning star swinging in a deadly, precise arc. The man reacted with surprising speed, drawing a short sword to block, but Rem's oni-fueled strength was overwhelming. The blade shattered, and the morning star slammed into his shoulder with a sickening crunch of bone. He screamed and went down. Simultaneously, Naruto appeared in the center of the clearing. A silent gust of wind, appearing directly in front of Meili. He didn't attack her. His hand shot out and snatched the fluffy, wagging puppy from the ground. Meili's eyes widened, her childish smile vanishing, replaced by pure, panicked fury. "Give me back my baby!" she shrieked. "Call off your dogs," Naruto said, his voice cold as ice. He held the squirming beast in one hand. It snapped at him with teeth that were suddenly long and sharp as razors. "Call them off, or I snap its neck." The very ground around them began to tremble. From the dark woods, dozens, then hundreds, of red eyes began to glow. The low, guttural growl of beasts surrounded the clearing. Garless hounds, ulgarms, creatures of every horrifying shape and size, were emerging from the shadows, drawn by their master's rage. "You think you can threaten me?" Meili shrieked, her voice losing its childish quality, becoming a shrill, hateful sound. "My puppies will tear you to shreds. Kill them." The wave of monsters charged. Naruto didn't flinch. He simply looked down at the snarling beast in his hand. Last chance. He made a fist with his other hand. A swirling, crackling sphere of pure, blue chakra roared to life in his palm. It spun with a high-pitched, terrifying shriek, illuminating the dark clearing with its violent, destructive light. The Rasengan, a technique of pure, unadulterated power. The charging beasts, creatures of instinct and magic, saw it and stopped dead in their tracks. They saw a power that was not of their world, a vortex of energy that promised not just death, but utter annihilation. A primal, instinctual terror overrode their master's command. They whimpered, they backed away, their snarling turning into frightened yelps. Meili stared at the spinning sphere of death in his hand, her jaw slack with disbelief and horror. That single ball of energy contained more raw, destructive power than her entire army of monsters combined. "You were saying?" Naruto asked, his voice dangerously soft. Meili, for the first time in her young, cruel life, knew what it felt like to be prey. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. A Cage of Silk and Steel. The Rasengan's violent hum as the only sound in the suddenly silent forest. It spun in Naruto's palm, a miniature, captive star casting a stark blue light across the clearing, painting the faces of his allies and enemies in shades of awe and terror. The beast army, a tide of tooth and claw that had been ready to overwhelm them moments before, was now a receding wave, the creatures, bloodlust utterly extinguished by the primal fear this new, incomprehensible power elicited. They whined and whimpered, their glowing red eyes filled not with malice, but with the terrified reverence a lesser god might show a greater one. Meili Portrout stood frozen, her childish mask of cheerful cruelty shattered, revealing the pale, frightened girl beneath. She stared at the spinning sphere of chakra, her mind, which understood the intricate languages of beasts and the subtle flows of curses, unable to process the sheer density of power contained in that perfect, elegant rotation. It was a power that didn't belong in this world. It was absolute. "I believe," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the ringing silence, "that we had an agreement. You call off your pets. Now." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The Rasengan spoke for him. Its high-pitched shriek a far more eloquent threat than any words could be. Meili swallowed hard, a choked sob escaping her lips. She raised a trembling hand and made a series of complex, sharp whistles and clicks, the command to retreat. The beasts, visibly relieved, turned and vanished back into the hallucinatory mists as silently as they had appeared. The oppressive presence of hundreds of predators lifted, leaving the clearing feeling unnervingly empty. Naruto allowed the Rasengan to dissipate, the sphere of chakra folding back into nothingness with a soft hiss. The sudden return to the dim, natural light of the forest was jarring. He looked down at the small, puppy-like beast still clutched in his hand. Its vicious snarling had ceased, it was now trembling uncontrollably, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. He gently set it on the ground. It immediately scurried back to Meili, hiding behind her frilly dress like a frightened child. With the immediate threat neutralized, Naruto turned his attention to the second captive. Rem stood over the cloaked intermediary, her morning star resting lightly on his chest, her expression cold and professional. The man was groaning, his shoulder a ruin of shattered bone. Naruto knelt beside him, his movements fluid and precise. "The conversation was just getting interesting," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "You mentioned a name, Patelgeus, a bishop in the witch cult, I presume." The man spat a wad of blood onto the ground, his eyes, visible beneath the hood, burning with fanaticism. "You will die a heretic's death. The Sin Archbishop of Sloth will see you ground into dust for your blasphemy. Our gospel tells us of the trials to come. The love of the witch is absolute. Naruto sighed. A fanatic. Reasoning with him was pointless. He glanced at Rem. Keep him secure. We're taking them both back. He then stood and faced Meili. The young girl was backed against a gnarled tree, clutching her pet. Her eyes darting between Naruto and Rem as if looking for any possible escape. What are you going to do to me? She whispered, her voice a trembling shadow of its former, sing-song sadism. That depends entirely on you, Naruto said, walking slowly towards her. He stopped a few feet away, his presence not overtly threatening, but overwhelmingly powerful. You're a loose end in a very dangerous game, Meili. You have two options. You can be an enemy, in which case you'll spend the rest of your short, unpleasant life in Rosewall's cellar next to your friend Elsa. I can promise you, you won't enjoy it. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. He saw the terror in her eyes, the knowledge of what Rosewall was capable of. Or, he continued, his tone softening slightly, you can be an asset. You have a unique and powerful ability. You control beasts. You can create curses. That kind of talent, pointed in the right direction, could be very useful. The Amelia camp could use someone with your skills. Meili stared at him, bewildered. You want me to work for you. After I tried to kill you. I'm a big believer in second chances, Naruto said with a shrug. And a bigger believer in pragmatic solutions. Killing you is easy. Imprisoning you is a hassle. But reforming you, turning an enemy into an ally. That's a true victory. He extended a hand, palm up. The choice is yours, Meili. A cage of stone and pain, or a cage of silk and purpose. Either way, you're not leaving this forest a free girl. But you can choose the nature of your cage. It was a masterful stroke of psychological warfare. He wasn't offering her freedom, he was offering her a better form of servitude. He was appealing to her sense of self-preservation, giving her a sliver of agency in her own capture. Meili looked at his outstretched hand, then at the cold, unforgiving face of Rem, then back at Naruto's calm, perceptive eyes. He wasn't lying. She could feel the honesty in his words, the simple, pragmatic truth of his offer. A life of service in a fancy mansion, or a life of torment in a dark, cold cellar. It wasn't a choice at all. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out her small, trembling hand and placed it in his. It was a surrender. The journey back was a mirror of their arrival, but with the added weight of their captives. The forest's illusions seemed to part before Naruto, the whispers and shadows receding from the sheer force of his presence. He had faced the heart of the forest's darkness and had bent it to his will. Back at the mansion, Ram and Subaru were waiting on the steps. Their faces etched with anxiety. When they saw the four figures emerge from the woods, Naruto and Rem leading a bound fanatic and a pale, defeated-looking Meili, their anxiety exploded into astonished relief. You did it! You actually did it! Subaru shouted, running towards them, his face split in a wide, joyous grin. You guys are amazing. Ram's expression was more restrained, but the relief in her eyes as she looked at her sister was profound. She gave a single, crisp nod to Naruto. It was a gesture of deep, unqualified respect. Rosewall appeared, as if on cue, his painted smile wider and more genuine than ever. Magnificent. A truly flawless operation. You have not only neutralized the immediate threats but have returned with a potential new ally and a high-ranking cultist for questioning. Naruto-kun, your performance continues to exceed even my most optimistic projections. The cloaked fanatic was hauled away to the now occupied dungeons, his fanatical curses echoing down the hall. Meili, however, was treated differently. She was not put in chains. She was shown to a comfortable guest room, one without a lock on the outside and with a window overlooking a sheer, 100-foot drop. A room that was, in every sense, the cage of silk and steel Naruto had promised. Naruto himself assigned Rem as her personal guard and warden. It was another calculated move. Rem, with her Oni heritage, had a deep-seated hatred for the witch cult that had orphaned her and her sister. Putting her in charge of Meili created a dynamic of fear and control that would keep the young beast tamer in line far more effectively than any physical restraint. But it also forced Rem to look at Meili not just as a symbol of her trauma, but as a person, a child, however twisted. It was a difficult, challenging task, and in giving it to her, Naruto was showing his faith in her strength and her newfound control. That evening, The atmosphere in the mansion was one of quiet, triumphant celebration. A special dinner was prepared. For the first time, Subaru was seated at the main table not as a guest, but as a recognized member of the team. Meili ate in her room, under Rem's watchful eye. During the meal, Amelia couldn't take her eyes off Naruto. Her admiration had blossomed into something deeper, more personal. He wasn't just a strategist or a guard, he was the bedrock upon which her hopes were now being built. He had faced assassins, beasts, and curses, and had overcome them all not just with power, but with wisdom, compassion, and a startling political acumen. "Naruto," she said, her voice soft but clear, capturing the attention of the table. "What you did today, offering Meili a place here, it was incredibly kind. It's the very ideal I want to build my kingdom on. That everyone, no matter their past, deserves a chance at redemption." Naruto met her earnest gaze. "Kindness is a good start, Amelia Tan. But kindness without strength is just a pleasant dream. We offered her a choice. But we did it from a position of absolute power. That's the reality of the world. To build your peaceful kingdom, you first have to be strong enough to defeat the people who want to burn it down." His words, a gentle but firm dose of political reality, resonated with her. She saw the wisdom in it, the balance of her idealism and his pragmatism. He wasn't just supporting her dream, he was showing her the hard, practical path to achieving it. In that moment, her feelings for him crystallized. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the burgeoning of love, a deep, resonant affection for the man who was both her strongest shield and her wisest counsel. Later that night, Naruto found himself on the same moonlit balcony outside the servants' quarters. He had known she would be there. Rem stood staring out at the twin moons, her expression thoughtful and complex. "She is just a child," Rem said, without turning around. "Meili, she is cruel and twisted, but underneath it all, she is a lonely, frightened child who was molded into a weapon by others. Most monsters are," Naruto replied quietly, coming to stand beside her. Watching her, Rem continued, her voice a low whisper. "It made me think of my past. Of my sister. Of what the witch cult did to us." She turned to him, her blue eye shimmering with unshed tears. "For years, I have been fueled by hatred for them. It was a simple, pure thing. But today, you showed me another way. Not just to defeat an enemy, but to unmake them. To offer them a different path. It is a strength I never knew existed." She took a small, hesitant step closer to him. The air between them was charged, filled with the unspoken emotions of the last few days. The intense training, the shared danger, the quiet moments of understanding. "When I lost control in the training yard," she said, her voice barely audible, "I expected you to be disgusted. Or afraid. Everyone always has been. But you weren't. You saw the monster inside me. And you just saw it as something to be trained. As a part of me." She looked up at him, her heart in her eyes. "Naruto-sama, you are the first person who has ever made me feel that my power is not a curse. You make me feel strong. Not just as an Oni, but as Rem." Before he could respond, she acted on an impulse that came from the deepest, most honest part of her soul. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips against his. It was not a kiss of fiery passion, but one of profound, overwhelming gratitude and burgeoning love. It was soft, hesitant, and yet it carried the weight of a lifetime of pain and a newfound hope. It was a silent thank you for seeing her, for saving her, not just from assassins, but from herself. The kiss was brief. She pulled back, her face flushed, a look of panicked vulnerability in her eyes, suddenly terrified she had overstepped her bounds. Naruto didn't look angry, or surprised, or amused. He simply looked at her, his cerulean eyes impossibly deep and gentle in the moonlight. He reached out and gently brushed a stray strand of blue hair from her face, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Rem," he said, his voice a soft, warm rumble. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Never forget that." He didn't address the kiss directly. He didn't need to. In his gentle acceptance, in the simple, profound respect in his voice, he gave her an answer that was more reassuring than any impassioned declaration could ever be. He accepted her feelings, acknowledged them, and treated them with a gentle, mature gravity. As he turned to leave her to her thoughts, he knew that the intricate web of his life in this new world had just become infinitely more complicated. He was the chief strategist for a royal candidate who was falling in love with him. He was the sensei and master to a powerful Oni maid who had just confessed her own feelings with a kiss. He was the reluctant warden of a child assassin and the interrogator of a religious fanatic. He had come to this world a lone warrior. Now, he was the center of a growing, complicated, and dangerously loyal family. And the shadow war for the throne of Lugnica had only just begun. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Gospel and the Gardener. The air in Rosewall L. Mather's private study was thick with the scent of old leather, expensive pipe tobacco, and secrets. Like the whimsical grandeur of the rest of the mansion, this room was a reflection of the man's true nature, a shadowy, opulent den of calculation. Dark, mahogany shelves overflowed with esoteric tomes bound in human skin like leather and other, more unsettling materials. Strange artifacts, a perpetually whispering crystal, a clock that ran backwards, a map of constellations no one in this world had ever seen, rested on every available surface, each one humming with a quiet, dangerous magic. Naruto stood before the Margrave's massive, claw-footed desk, his arms crossed, a pillar of calm in the chaotic decor. Amelia sat in a high-backed chair to his right, her expression a mixture of resolve and apprehension. The jovial, celebratory mood of the previous night had evaporated with the morning mist, leaving behind the cold reality of their next move. Rosewall, lounging in his throne-like chair, puffed on a long, elegant pipe, a thin stream of purple smoke curling towards the coffered ceiling. His painted smile was gone, replaced by a look of sharp, predatory focus. He had spent the better part of the night with their new prisoner, the cultist, and the fruits of that conversation were laid bare. Our fanatic was quite talkative. In the end, Rosewall said, his theatrical drawl pared down to a low, serious purr. He is a finger of the Sin Archbishop of Sloth, Patelgius Romani Conti. A name that should freeze the blood of any who know our kingdom's dark history. Patelgius, Amelia whispered, her hands tightening in her lap. He was one of the leaders of the cult during their great assault a century ago. I thought he was killed. It seems reports of his death were greatly exaggerated, Rosewall noted grimly. Or perhaps the title is passed down. The cult is fond of such traditions. Regardless, a Sin Archbishop is on the move, and his attention is fixed firmly upon you, my dear Leah Tan. Why? Naruto asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. What does he want with Amelia? Our guest was clutching a curious little book, Rosewall said, tapping a black, leather-bound tome that lay on his desk. It was unremarkable, save for the unsettling, I-like symbol embossed on its cover. He called it a gospel. He claims it is a gift from the witch, a guide that shows the faithful their path. It tells them where to go, what to do, it foretells the future that will bring them closest to her love. Naruto's eyes narrowed. A book that told the future. It was a terrifyingly powerful tool for a terrorist organization. And what does this gospel say about Amelia? It says, Rosewall said, leaning forward, his mismatched eyes glinting, that in 2 days, you, my dear Leah, will be visiting the village of Hogus, near the border of my domain. And that there, you will face a great trial that will prove your worthiness. A trial? Amelia questioned. But I have no plans to visit Hogus. And that is the trap, Naruto concluded, the pieces snapping together in his mind. They aren't predicting the future. They are writing it. They create a prophecy, then they orchestrate the events to make it come true. They'll attack the village, create a crisis, and when you, as the local noble candidate, arrive to help, they'll spring their trial. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of death. Rosewall clapped his hands softly. Precisely. A brilliant, insidious strategy. They force your hand, drawing you to a killing field of their own design. A heavy silence descended upon the study. The scale of the enemy's cunning was daunting. They weren't just using assassins, they were manipulating causality itself. Using faith and prophecy as weapons. Then we must warn the village, Amelia said, her voice firm. We must send knights, evacuate the people, and show our hand. Naruto countered gently. If we send knights, the cult will simply vanish, their trap unset, and they will write a new future in their gospels for a different time, a different place. We'll be forever on the defensive. waiting for the next prophecy to come true. We can't just react to the trap, Amelia Tan. We have to disarm it. And to do that, we need to walk into it. Amelia looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, not for herself, but for him. You want to go there, knowing it's a trap, not just go there, Naruto said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. We're going to hijack their prophecy. They are expecting the noble candidate and her guards to walk into an ambush. They are not expecting a shinobi to be waiting for them in the shadows when they arrive. We're going to turn their stage into our own. He spent the rest of the morning in the mansion's vast kitchens, a place that was quickly becoming his personal sanctuary. He wasn't cooking, but he found the familiar smells and the quiet, rhythmic work of the staff to be calming. He found Subaru there, attempting to help Ram by peeling potatoes, a task he was performing with comical ineptitude, leaving more peel on the potato than in the bowl. Naruto leaned against the doorframe, watching them for a moment. Ram's insults were as sharp and merciless as ever, but they lacked their earlier, genuine disdain. There was a familiar, almost fond exasperation in her tone now. Subaru, for his part, took the verbal abuse with a grin, firing back his own witty, if anachronistic, retorts. They had developed a strange, bickering camaraderie. Taking a break from your duties as my aide, Subaru? Naruto asked, his voice laced with amusement. Subaru jumped, nearly dropping the potato. Naruto dono. Just, fam. Illurizing myself with logistical operations. Yeah, Naruto chuckled and gestured for Subaru to follow him. He led him out into a small, quiet courtyard. We have a new mission. Another dangerous one. Your role is going to be the same. You'll be our fail-safe. Our memory. Subaru's cheerful demeanor faded, replaced by a grim understanding. Right, the living save point. He kicked at a loose stone. You know, it's weird. When I'm in the thick of it, it's terrifying. But then, we win. And I feel like a hero. And then it's quiet, and I remember that the only reason we won is because in another reality, I'm lying in a pool of my own blood. It's hard to reconcile those two things. Naruto placed a hand on his shoulder. What you're doing is no different from what any scout in a war does. They go behind enemy lines. They risk their lives to gather information. Most of them don't come back. Their sacrifice provides the intel that allows the main force to win. The only difference is, you're the scout who always comes back. You bear the memory of the sacrifice yourself. That doesn't make you a victim, Subaru. It makes you a soldier with the toughest damn job in the army. Subaru looked up at him. A flicker of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. Naruto wasn't pitying him. He was respecting him. He was contextualizing his horrifying curse into a role of honor and duty. It didn't make the dying less terrifying, but it made the living more purposeful. Okay, Subaru said, his voice stronger. Okay, I can do that. What's the plan? Later, Naruto sought out Meili. He found her not in her room, but in the menagerie at the far end of the estate, where Rosewall kept a collection of rare and semi-dangerous beasts. Rem stood guard near the entrance, a silent, watchful shadow. Meili was inside a large enclosure with a pack of ground dragons, the reptilian creatures used to pull carriages. The beasts, normally ill-tempered and aggressive, were acting like oversized puppies around her, nuzzling against her and licking her hands as she groomed their tough, scaly hides. They were stressed, Meili said, not looking up as Naruto approached. The grooms here use brushes that are too rough. They don't know the right spots to scratch. You have a gift, Meili, Naruto said, leaning on the fence. It's not a gift, she replied, her voice flat. It's a language. They're just talking. Most people are too stupid to listen. I'm listening now, Naruto said. I need to know about Betelgeuse. What have you heard among the other cultists? What are his methods? What kind of beasts does he favor, if any? Meili fell silent, her hand stilling on the ground dragon's neck. You don't want to fight the Archbishop of Sloth, she said, her voice a low, fearful whisper. He's not like Elsa Onichan. She kills because she loves it. He kills because his gospel tells him to. He's diligent. He has unseen hands. You can't see them, but they'll rip you apart. He doesn't use beasts. He thinks they're lazy. He prefers followers who are diligent enough to die for him on command. Unseen hands. It was a crucial piece of intel, confirming a power that was invisible and, therefore, incredibly difficult to fight. Thank you, Meili, Naruto said. That's helpful. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. Why? She asked, finally looking at him, her purple eyes filled with a confused, resentful curiosity. Why are you being nice to me? Why did you give me this room instead of the cellar? Naruto looked at her, at the child playing with monsters, and saw a reflection of himself, he boy who had been ostracized for the monster inside him. Because, he said, his voice soft but firm, I think everyone deserves a chance to be more than the weapon someone else tried to make them. The choice of what you become from now on, Meili, that choice is yours. He left her there, surrounded by her dragons, the seed of a new possibility planted in the barren ground of her cynical, cruel world. His final stop before solidifying his plan was the Forbidden Library. He opened the door without knocking, his senses immediately locating the pocket dimension, and stepped inside. Beatrice was on her step stool, as always. But she wasn't reading. She was staring into the swirling vortex above, a look of profound, ancient boredom on her face. You're becoming a bother, Naruto Uzumaki, I suppose. She greeted him without looking down. My library is not a public cafe, in fact. Good, because I'm fresh out of witty banter, Naruto replied, walking to the center of the room. I need every thing you have on Patelgius Romani Conti and the authority of the Sin Archbishops. Beatrice sighed dramatically and floated down from her perch. Sloth, one of the witch's original followers. A truly unpleasant man. His authority, the unseen hand, is a manifestation of raw yin magic. It creates ethereal appendages, invisible to almost all eyes, that can exert immense physical force. They are extensions of his will. To fight him is to fight a ghost that can crush you like a grape, in fact. Invisible to almost all eyes. Naruto picked up on the qualifier. So they can be seen. A high-level spirit like myself can perceive them. Beatrice admitted with a sniff. And it is said that those who have no knowledge of magic, whose eyes are untainted by the flow of mana, sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of the distortion they cause in the air. But for a magic user like Leah, or even the Oni girl, he would be utterly invisible. This changed everything. A normal magic user would be at a complete disadvantage. But Naruto, a sage, didn't rely on his eyes. He relied on sensing the natural energy around him. An invisible hand, no matter how ethereal, would have to displace that energy to exert force. He could sense it. He could fight it. Thank you, Beatrice, he said, a slow smile forming. You've just given me the key to victory. HMPH. Just don't get yourself killed, I suppose, she mumbled, turning her back on him. It would be troublesome to have to break in a new, irritating conversation partner. He found Amelia in the greenhouse, a magnificent glass dome attached to the west wing of the mansion, filled with the most extraordinary collection of flora he had ever seen. There were flowers that pulsed with a soft, inner light, vines that hummed with a low melody, and fun GI that changed color with the ambient temperature. She was tending to a bed of pale, silver-bellied roses, her movements gentle and focused. She looked at peace here, a stark contrast to the worried candidate in the war room. I didn't know you were a gardener, he said, his voice soft so as not to startle her. She looked up, a lovely, genuine smile gracing her lips as she saw him. It's my one selfish hobby. Seeing things grow. It helps me remember what I'm fighting for. She paused, setting down her trowel. Naruto, can I ask you something personal? Always, he said, leaning against a support beam. This place you're from, Konoha, she began, her gaze earnest and searching. Were you a leader there, too? You carry yourself like someone used to command, used to making these life and death decisions. He hesitated. To tell her he was the Hokage, the leader she aspired to be, felt like a boast. I was a soldier for a long time, he said carefully. Eventually, I was given a position of great responsibility. I had to learn to think like this. It wasn't always easy. Was there someone? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her cheeks flushing slightly. In your old life, was someone special you were fighting for? A lover. It was the question behind the question. Is your heart taken? Is there room for me? Naruto's mind flashed with 100 images, the fierce loyalty of Sasuke, the steadfast love of Hinata, the brotherly bond with Iruka, the memory of Jiraiya's goofy grin. His life had been defined by the people he fought for. There were many special people, he answered honestly, his voice thick with a sudden, profound nostalgia. My whole world was built on the bonds I had with my friends, my teachers, my family. They were the reason I fought. The reason I got strong. Protecting their smiles was the most important thing in the world to me. He didn't give her a simple yes or no. He gave her something truer. He gave her the core of his philosophy, his nindo, his ninja way. He showed her the shape of his heart without naming who occupied it. Amelia listened, her amethyst eyes shining with understanding and an even deeper affection. He was a man defined by love and loyalty. It made him even more admirable in her eyes. That's a beautiful way to live, she said softly. She gestured to a patch of vibrant blue flowers nearby. Before you go, I wanted to mention something else. A political matter. I've been meaning to open a dialogue with another candidate, Crush Karsten. She is a formal, honorable woman, and a master swordswoman. Her faction is militaristic and highly disciplined. An alliance with her could be invaluable. These flowers, they are called Karsten sapphires. They only grow in her domain. Crush Karsten. Naruto filed the name away. A rival candidate, a potential ally, another piece on the ever-expanding board. That night, Naruto gathered Rem and Subaru. He laid out the map. His plan was no longer just to spring a trap. It was to perform surgery. We're not going to Hogus as representatives of the Amelia camp, he declared. We're going in quiet. We'll pose as wandering merchants. Rem, you and I. Subaru, you'll stay at an inn in the neighboring town with Ram as your contact. Close enough to reset effectively, far enough to be safe. He looked them in the eyes, his own blazing with a fierce, confident light. The witch cult wants to make a point. They want to put on a show. We're going to get there early, find the best seats, and bring down the curtain before their first act even begins. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Diligence of a Sage. The village of Hogus was nestled in a gentle valley, a picture of idyllic rural life that felt almost surreal given the sinister purpose for which it had been chosen. Quaint, thatched roof cottages clustered around a small, central square, and the air was clean and smelled of freshly tilled earth and baking bread. To Naruto, however, the pastoral tranquility was a thin veneer over a ticking bomb. His sage mode was active, a constant, low-level thrum beneath his skin, and he could feel the wrongness of the place. It was in the subtle, almost imperceptible traces of unfamiliar mana lingering in the woods. The faint scent of zealous hatred clinging to the shadows between the houses. The witch cult was already here, hiding, waiting. He and Rem arrived not in the finery of the Rosewall household, but in the simple, worn clothes of traveling merchants. Naruto carried a large pack filled with mundane goods, textiles, spices, and cheap metal trinkets, while Rem, her hair tied back in a simple cloth and her maid uniform replaced with a practical tunic and trousers, carried a smaller bag of supplies. They looked utterly unremarkable, just another pair of wanderers trying to make a living. Blending seamlessly into the rhythm of the village. They spent the day establishing their cover, setting up a small stall in the market square and engaging with the locals. Naruto, with his natural charisma and easy smile, was a natural. He haggled good-naturedly, shared stories, heavily edited versions of his adventures, and listened to the villagers' gossip. Rem, initially stiff and awkward in her new role, slowly relaxed under his guidance, her quiet efficiency coming across as a charming shyness. But beneath the performance, they were gathering intelligence. Naruto's senses were his primary tool. He mapped the entire village in his mind, not just the streets and buildings, but the hidden alleyways, the secluded groves, the cellars and attics. He identified every cultist hiding in plain sight. There were a dozen of them, posing as farmhands, travelers, even a new apprentice to the village blacksmith. They were patient, disciplined, their fanaticism a cold, steady flame he could feel beneath their placid exteriors. They were the grunts, the first wave. Rem, meanwhile, focused on the people. She spoke to the women, the children, her gentle demeanor and genuine interest drawing them out. She learned who lived where, the daily routines, the layout of each home. This wasn't just about identifying the enemy, it was about protecting the innocent. If a fight broke out, they needed to know where every civilian was, how to move them, how to shield them from the crossfire. By nightfall, they had a complete picture of the battlefield. They retired to the CNGLE room they'd rented at the village inn, the scent of hay and old wood thick in the air. Spreading a hand-drawn map on the small, rickety table, Naruto began to place small stones on it, marking the locations of the cultists. 12 of them, scattered in pairs, he murmured, his voice low. They're disciplined. They're waiting for the signal. Their leader must be nearby, Rem whispered, her brow furrowed in concentration. The Archbishop, Patelgius. Do you sense him? Naruto shook his head, a frown on his face. No, and that's what bothers me. I can feel their network, the lines of communication between them. But the one holding the strings is nowhere in the vicinity. He's either shielded by a magic that can fool even my senses, or he is not here yet, Rem finished, her eyes widening in understanding. They are the stagehands. They are setting the scene. The star of the show will only arrive when the curtain is about to rise. Exactly, Naruto confirmed, which means we have a window. We can't wait for him to make the first move. We have to remove his pieces from the board before the game even begins. His plan was simple, audacious, and utterly ruthless. They would engage in a pitched battle in the center of the village. They would hunt. Under the cloak of the new moon, two shadows detached themselves from the inn. They moved with a supernatural silence, flowing through the sleeping village like ghosts. This was Naruto's world, the world of the shinobi. Assassination, infiltration, silent takedowns, this was the art form he had perfected. Their first targets were a pair of cultists bunking in a barn at the edge of the village. Naruto and Rem approached from opposite sides, their footsteps making no sound on the damp earth. Naruto placed a hand on the rough, wooden wall of the barn. His senses piercing through it, pinpointing the two sleeping forms within. He held up two fingers, then closed one. On one. They moved in perfect synchrony. The barn door didn't creak, it simply opened. Two blurs of motion shot inside. Before the cultists could even register the intrusion, before they could even draw a breath to cry out, it was over. Naruto's hand chopped down on the back of one's neck. A precise strike that instantly rendered him unconscious. Rem, moving with a cold, Oni-fueled efficiency, dispatched the other with a single, brutal, non-lethal blow from the handle of her morning star. They bound and gagged their captives, hiding them in the deepest part of the hayloft, all within the space of 10 seconds. One by one, they moved through the village, a silent, efficient engine of guerrilla warfare. They were a perfect team. Naruto was the strategist and vanguard, his senses identifying the targets and his skills allowing him to neutralize them with chilling precision. Rem was the heavy ordnance, her raw power, now honed and controlled, providing the overwhelming force needed to instantly incapacitate any who offered the slightest resistance. They cleared the blacksmith's shop, the mill, and a small, abandoned shack in the woods. 8 more cultists were taken down without a single alarm being raised. The witch cult's carefully laid ambush was being dismantled from the inside out, its soldiers removed from the field before they even knew the battle had begun. Their final targets were the pair lodging in the room directly across the hall from their own at the inn. This was the riskiest takedown, the one most likely to cause a commotion. I'll take the one on the left. You take the one on the right, Naruto whispered, his lips close to Rem's ear as they stood flattened against the wall of the corridor. No matter what, they cannot make a sound. Rem nodded, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a fierce, exhilarating focus. She had never felt so alive, so in sync with another person. This was not a maid following orders, this was a partner in a deadly dance. Naruto kicked the door open with a single, explosive motion that shattered the lock. They were inside before the wood had even finished splintering. The two cultists, who had been sitting at a table, looking over a map of their own, scrambled for their weapons, their faces masks of shock. They were too slow. Naruto was a golden blur, his fist connecting with one's jaw with a sickening crack. The man went down in a heap. The second cultist, however, was faster. He drew a wicked-looking curved dagger and lunged, not at Naruto, but at Rem. It was a fatal mistake. He saw her as the weaker target. Rem met his charge head-on. Her morning star wasn't in her hand. She didn't need it. With a roar, her horn sprouted, her power surging. She caught the man's knife hand in a grip of iron, stopping his attack cold. His eyes widened in terror as he saw the glowing horn, the icy blue fury in her eye. With her free hand, she delivered a single, devastating punch to his sternum. The sound was like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. The man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, all the air driven from his lungs. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. They dragged the last 2 captives into their own room, adding them to the growing collection. Now all 12 of the advance guard were neutralized. The village was secure. Phase 1 complete. Naruto breathed, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. They won't be missed until morning. But that's when Betelgeuse is due to arrive. He'll find his pawns gone and he'll know the trap has been sprung. So we leave? Rem asked, her Oni horn receding. We have saved the village. No, Naruto said, his eyes hardening. We haven't. We've only postponed the danger. A man like Betelgeuse won't just pack up and go home. He'll be angry. He'll be diligent. If he can't execute his plan, he'll likely just slaughter the whole village out of spite. We can't let that happen. We didn't come here to scare him off. We came here to end him. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark, silent woods that surrounded the valley. He'll come, and he'll be looking for who ruined his plans. So we'll give him a target. The next morning, the village of Hogus awoke to a strange sight. A magnificent, horseless carriage bearing the crest of the Rosewall family was parked in the center of the square. Standing beside it, no longer in merchant's clothes but in her elegant white and purple dress, was Lady Amelia herself. Looking every bit the noble candidate. She had arrived in the pre-dawn hours, escorted by Ram, according to Naruto's meticulously timed plan. Her arrival was the bait. Whoa! Word spread through the village like wildfire. The royal candidate was here. She had come to hear their concerns, to bless their harvest. The villagers began to gather, their faces filled with awe and excitement. Naruto and Rem were nowhere to be seen. They were already in position, hidden on the roof of the inn, which offered a perfect, panoramic view of the square. They were shadows, waiting, watching. Naruto's senses were stretched to their absolute limit. He felt the excitement of the villagers, Amelia's calm but nervous resolve, Ram's stoic presence by the carriage. And then he felt it. It was a sudden, sickening drop in the ambient temperature of the world. A distortion, a presence so utterly mad and fanatical that it felt like a cancer on the natural order. It appeared at the edge of the woods. A single figure in a dark green and black uniform, his short, dark green hair almost vibrating with a manic energy. Betelgeuse Romani Conti had arrived. He did not walk. He lurched, his head cocked at an unnatural angle, his limbs moving in jerky, puppet-like motions. He shambled into the square, a demented, terrifying grin plastered on his face. Ah, a trial, a test of my love. He shrieked, his voice a high-pitched, grating sound that made the villagers recoil in fear. The gospel has guided me to this blessed place, to the presence of the witch's vessel. My love, my love, my love. How my brain trembles. Amelia stood her ground, her hand clutching the insignia at her collar, Huck now floating protectively by her side. Betelgeuse Romani Conti, your presence here is an act of treason. Leave now, and I will be merciful. Mercy. How slothful. Betelgeuse cackled, clawing at his own face in a fit of ecstasy. Diligence is what is required. The diligence to prove one's love through trials. He pointed a trembling finger at Amelia. You have interfered with my plans. My followers, my diligent believers, they do not respond. This is your doing, is it not, you filthy half-witch? Before Amelia could respond, Naruto acted. Hey, crazy, a calm voice called out from the rooftop. Betelgeuse's head snapped up, his eyes, wide and bloodshot, locking onto Naruto's position. You, another heretic, another trial. Your followers aren't responding because they're all taking a nap, Naruto said, a lazy smile on his face as he stood up, revealing himself to the whole square. The party's cancelled. You should have checked your messages. Betelgeuse's grin widened into a rictus of pure, homicidal rage. It was you, a diligent pest who must be squashed. I will show you the fruits of my diligence. He lunged forward, but not at Amelia. He lunged at the nearest villager, a screaming woman clutching her child. But he never reached her. Suddenly, Telgius was flung backwards as if hit by an invisible truck. He flew through the air, tumbling end over end, before crashing into the side of the village well with a sound of cracking stone. Naruto stood on the rooftop, his arm outstretched. He hadn't moved an inch. The villagers stared, confused. Amelia and Puck looked stunned. Rem, beside Naruto, watched with grim satisfaction. Telgius slowly, agonizingly, picked himself up from the rubble, his body bent at an even more unnatural angle. What was that? My unseen hands, you can see them. See them? No, Naruto called down, his voice resonating with a sage's power. I don't need to. I can feel them. I can feel every move you make, every flicker of your sick, twisted chakra. Your invisibility is useless against me. What Naruto had just done was a masterful application of his own power. He had used a precise, controlled burst of his own chakra, a chakra push, to create a defensive wall of force, intercepting Telgius's unseen hand with his own invisible power. It was yin magic versus sage art, ghost versus god. Telgius shrieked in rage and frustration. He unleashed a barrage of attacks. Dozens of unseen hands, a flurry of invisible, crushing force, flew towards Naruto from every direction. Naruto became a blur. He didn't just block, he moved, flowing across the rooftop with impossible grace. He dodged, he weaved, he parried, using his chakra pushes to deflect every single invisible blow. To the onlookers, it was a bizarre, terrifying spectacle. The air around Naruto seemed to explode with invisible impacts, the roof tiles beneath his feet shattering from blows that never seemed to land, while he moved through the chaos completely untouched, a dancer in a hurricane only he could perceive. My turn, Naruto said, his voice dropping. All traces of humor gone. He vanished from the rooftop. He reappeared directly in front of the stunned Sin Archbishop. He wasn't using a simple chakra push now. His entire fist was enveloped in a dense, visible shroud of blue chakra. A chakra-enhanced punch. If his pushes were parries, this was a cannonball. You talk a lot about diligence, Naruto said, his voice cold as the grave. Let me show you what true diligence looks like. He drove his fist forward. Telgius tried to bring his unseen hands up to defend, but he was too slow. Naruto's fist, carrying the weight of a mountain, slammed into his chest. There was no grand explosion, no showy display of magic. Just a sickening, wet crunch. The Sin Archbishop of Sloth's eyes went wide, not with pain, but with utter, final surprise. He looked down and saw Naruto's fist buried to the wrist in his sternum. A trickle of blood dribbled from his lips. So, diligent, he whispered, and then his body went limp. Naruto withdrew his fist and let the corpse fall to the ground. He stood there, panting slightly, the only sound in the square the terrified gasps of the villagers and the whisper of the wind. He had done it. He had faced a Sin Archbishop, one of the most feared beings in the kingdom, and had utterly, completely, and efficiently dismantled him in less than a minute. He hadn't just won, he had dominated. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the stunned villagers, the awestruck Amelia, and finally landing on Rem, who was looking down at him from the rooftop, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it threatened to consume her. It was a mixture of awe, reverence, and a deep, all-encompassing love for the man who had just saved them all, not with rage or fury, but with a calm, absolute, and terrifying diligence all his own. The Shadow War was far from over. But today, the Sage of Lugnica had won a decisive, legendary victory. Chapter 10 End. Chapter 11. The Lioness and the Fox. The silence that fell over Hogus in the wake of Telgius's death was a heavy, fragile thing. It was the sound of a world holding its breath, unsure if the nightmare was truly over. The villagers, who moments before had been screaming or frozen in terror, now stared at the motionless body of the Sin Archbishop and then at the tall, blond man who stood over it, his form silhouetted against the morning sun. He looked less like a man and more like a myth, a golden-haired god of retribution descended from the heavens. Naruto paid them no mind. His first action was to turn to Amelia, who was standing frozen by the carriage. Her face pale with shock. He gave her a small, reassuring nod, a silent message that said, "It's over. You're safe." Then, with the practiced ease of a leader accustomed to managing the aftermath of battle. He began to delegate. "Rem," he called out, his voice cutting cleanly through the stunned silence. "Secure the body. We're taking it with us as proof. Ram, begin coordinating with the village elder. We need a head count. Ensure everyone is safe and accounted for. Set up a temporary aid station in the inn for those in shock." His calm, authoritative commands broke the spell of paralysis. Rem leapt down from the roof, her movements once again all business. Ram, her expression one of deep, profound respect, immediately moved to carry out her orders. It was Amelia who took the next, crucial step. Shaking off her own shock, she drew herself up to her full height, her regal bearing returning. She stepped forward, her gentle voice carrying across the square. "People of Hogus, you are safe now. The threat has been eliminated." She didn't point to Naruto, didn't name him as their savior. In a stroke of surprising political savvy, she claimed the victory for her faction, for the system she represented. "My camp came here today to protect you, and we have fulfilled that promise. Please, cooperate with my aides. We will ensure the village is secure." Naruto watched her, a proud smile touching his lips. She was learning. She understood that he was her sword, but she had to be the voice. Her words calmed the populace, transforming their fear into awe and gratitude towards the royal candidate who had, in their eyes, saved them. He deliberately faded into the background, allowing her to take the lead, becoming the enigmatic, powerful weapon in her arsenal rather than the hero of the story himself. It was a subtle but vital distinction. The journey back to the mansion was conducted in a state of surreal quiet. The corpse of the Sin Archbishop, wrapped in canvas, was secured to the roof of the carriage, a grim trophy and an undeniable piece of evidence. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken thoughts. Amelia kept stealing glances at Naruto, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle man who tended gardens with the warrior who could obliterate one of history's greatest monsters without breaking a sweat. "You were incredible," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You fought him like he was nothing." "He was nothing," Naruto replied, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. "He was a fanatic driven by a mad faith. There's no strength in that, only brittleness. All I did was push until he broke." He turned to her, his expression serious. "The real challenge isn't winning the fight, Amelia Tan. It's dealing with what comes next." What came next arrived before they even reached the mansion. A messenger on a prized steed, bearing the insignia of the Royal Knights, was waiting for them at the edge of Rosewall's domain. He carried a single, formal scroll, sealed with the crest of the Karsten family. It was not a request. It was a summons. Crush Karsten, Duchess of the Karsten domain and rival royal candidate, demanded an immediate audience. The news of a Sin Archbishop's death had traveled faster than any carriage. The political chessboard had been violently shaken, and one of its most powerful players wanted to meet the hand that had moved the piece. Rosewall was practically vibrating with delighted amusement when they presented him with the news. "Ooh, my. The Iron Fang wishes to meet the Hidden Fox. How positively delicious. A Sin Archbishop is slain, and the first person to react is not the Knight Captain, not the Council of Sages, but Crush Karsten herself. She is as sharp and opportunistic as ever. He sees this as both a threat and an opportunity," Naruto reasoned, pacing Rosewall's study. "An unknown power has emerged and eliminated a major threat. She wants to know if that power is an enemy to be crushed or an ally to be gained." "Precisely," Rosewall trilled. "This is a political test, Naruto-kun. Crush is not a woman who is easily impressed by brute force. She values strength, yes, but also dignity, honor, and honesty. Her divine protection of wind reading allows her to know if a person is lying. It makes her a formidable negotiator." "Then I'll have to tell her the truth," Naruto said simply. Rosewall's painted smile widened. How delightfully straightforward, and how utterly confounding it will be for her. "Go, take Leah Tan with you." It is time she began to move in these circles not as a candidate, but as a power player. And your presence will be the ultimate statement. The Karsten ducal estate was a world away from Rosewall's Gothic eccentricity. It was a fortress of elegant austerity. Clean, white stone walls, banners bearing the crest of a golden lion snapping crisply in the wind, and meticulously manicured grounds spoke of discipline, order, and immense martial pride. Soldiers in immaculate uniforms drilled in the courtyards with a silent, focused intensity. This was not the home of a mage, it was the headquarters of a general. Their carriage was met not by maids, but by a knight in resplendent white armor. He was a handsome young man with flaxen hair and a cat-like, almost feminine grace. A long, thin sword hung at his hip. What was most striking, however, were the twitching cat ears atop his head and the tail that swished gently behind him. "Welcome to the Karsten estate, Amelia Sama, Rosewall's mysterious new guard dog San," the knight chirped. His voice playful but his eyes sharp and analytical. "I am Ferris Argyle, captain of the Ducal Guard. Crush Sama is waiting for you. Please, follow me out." Subaru, who had insisted on coming as part of Amelia's retinue, nearly short-circuited. "A real catboy, for real," he whispered excitedly to Rem, who simply ignored him with practiced ease. Ferris led them through hallways that were wide, airy, and decorated with tapestries depicting great historical battles. His demeanor was light and teasing, but Naruto could feel the probing intelligence behind it. The cat knight was constantly assessing them, his playful chatter a disarming tool to catch them off guard. Naruto met it with an unassailable, good-natured calm that seemed to frustrate the knight to no end. They were shown into a grand reception hall. At the far end, standing before a massive, arched window that overlooked the capital, was a woman who radiated an aura of absolute command. Crush Karsten was tall and beautiful, with long, dark green hair and sharp, intelligent amber eyes. She wore a severe, militaristic dress uniform that emphasized her regal posture. She held no weapon, but she looked more dangerous than any soldier in her employ. Beside her stood an old man, ramrod straight, with impeccable white hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. He wore the formal attire of a butler, but his posture, the economy of his movement, and the unnerving stillness in his gray eyes spoke of a lifetime of battle. His gaze was fixed on Naruto from the moment he entered the room, a gaze of profound, weighty assessment. This was the legendary Wilhelm van Astria, the sword demon. "Amelia Sama," Crush said, her voice as clear and commanding as a trumpet call. She inclined her head in a gesture of formal respect. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. The events of this morning have necessitated this meeting." Her amber eyes then shifted, landing squarely on Naruto. They were not hostile, but they were as sharp and penetrating as a surgeon's scalpel. "And you are the man they are calling the Sage of the Rosewall domain. The man who killed Patelgius Romani Conti." "I am Crush Karsten, Naruto Uzumaki," he replied, meeting her gaze without a hint of bravado or intimidation. "A pleasure to meet you, Karsten Sama." Crush gestured to the chairs arranged in the center of the room. "Please, sit. Let us dispense with pleasantries. I am a direct woman, Uzumaki Dono. An entity of immense power has appeared within the faction of my rival. This entity has single-handedly eliminated a threat that has plagued this kingdom for a century. You will understand that this raises a great many questions. I wish for you to answer them." The negotiation had begun. It was a verbal battlefield, and Crush had fired the opening salvo. "I will answer what I can," Naruto replied smoothly, taking a seat. Amelia sat beside him, projecting an air of calm she did not feel. "Very well," Crush said, her eyes narrowing. "Let us begin with the most pressing question. Who are you, and where does your allegiance lie?" The wind in the room subtly shifted. A faint, almost invisible shimmer surrounded Crush. Her divine protection was active. She was listening for the lie. "My name is Naruto Uzumaki," he stated again, his voice clear and unwavering. "As for my allegiance, it lies with Amelia. I have pledged my strength to her cause. I believe her desire to create a nation where all people are judged by their character and not their birth is a worthy and just goal, and I will see it realized." The air settled. Crush's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He had spoken the absolute, unvarnished truth. His conviction was so pure, so powerful, that her divine protection had registered it as solid as bedrock. This confounded her. She had expected a mercenary, a zealot, a man with a hidden agenda. She had not expected a true believer. "Your conviction is admirable," she conceded, her tone shifting from inquisitorial to intrigued. "But your power is not. It is unheard of." The reports from Hogus claim you neutralized the Archbishop's authority of sloth with an invisible force of your own, and then killed him with a single blow. Explain this power. Where I trained, we learned to harness our own life energy, our chakra, Naruto explained, giving a simplified, truthful answer. It can be used to strengthen the body, create elemental effects. Or as you saw, be projected as a force. It is a different discipline from the magic of this land, but it is a martial art, nothing more. A martial art that can kill a Sin Archbishop, Ferris chimed in. A sharp edge to his playful tone. That's a pretty intense karate class, NYA tilde. Naruto simply smiled at him. It was a very demanding school. Crush held up a hand, silencing her knight. She was silent for a long moment, her sharp mind processing the information. He was truthful, he was powerful, and he was completely dedicated to her rival. I see, she said finally. Your appearance has drastically altered the political landscape. The other candidates will be scrambling. The royal knights will be investigating. The council of sages will be in an uproar. The Amelia camp, once considered a sentimental long shot, has become a formidable military power overnight because of you. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. This creates a new dynamic. I propose an alliance. Amelia gasped softly. This was the very thing she had hoped for, but to have it offered so directly was stunning. An alliance, Naruto prompted. What are your terms? Simple, Crush stated. We will share intelligence and coordinate our efforts against the witch cult. They are an enemy to the entire kingdom, and a united front is the most logical course of action. Furthermore, we will present a non-aggression pact to the other candidates. Any infighting now will only benefit our true enemies. She paused, her gaze locking onto him. In return for this, I want your promise. That your power will be used only to defend the kingdom and to further Amelia Sama's legitimate political goals. You will not act as a rogue agent. You will operate within the structure of this alliance. It was a brilliant move. She was attempting to put a leash on him, to bind the unpredictable god of war into a contract that served her own interests as well as Amelia's. Before Naruto could answer, a new voice, quiet and raspy with age, spoke for the first time. May I ask the guest a question, Crush-sama? All eyes turned to Wilhelm van Astria. The old butler had been standing motionless, a statue of polite servitude. But his gray eyes had never left Naruto. They burned with a fire that belied his age. Crush nodded. You may, Wilhelm. The old man took a single step forward. He was not addressing Naruto the politician, or Naruto the enigma. He was addressing Naruto the warrior. Uzumaki Dono, he said, his voice resonating with a lifetime of battle. The way you hold yourself, way you breathe, it is the posture of a man who has lived and nearly died on the battlefield 1,000 times. It is a stillness I have not seen since my own youth. I do not wish to know the nature of your power. I wish to know the nature of your sword. He bowed his head slightly. Tell me, honored warrior, for what purpose do you fight? The question cut through all the politics, all the intrigue, and struck at the very core of Naruto's being. It was the same question he had asked himself 100 times, the question that defined his entire life. Naruto's relaxed posture straightened. He looked at the old sword demon. And for the first time, he let the full weight of his experience, his history, show in his eyes. He wasn't speaking to Crush or Ferris or even Amelia. He was speaking to a fellow soldier. A man who understood the language of steel and sacrifice. I fight to protect the smiles of the people I care about, Naruto said, his voice quiet but echoing with an unshakable conviction. I fight so that the next generation doesn't have to grow up in a world filled with the same hatred and violence that I did. I fight to break the cycle of revenge. I fight for peace, even I have to walk through hell to achieve it. The words were simple, but they carried the power of a sacred vow. They were the culmination of his entire life, from the lonely boy on the swing to the hero who had saved the world. Wilhelm van Astria looked at him, and for a moment, the old butler was gone, replaced by the sword demon of legend. A slow, profound smile touched the old warrior's lips. He straightened up and gave Naruto a sharp, deep bow from the waist, a bow of ultimate respect from one grandmaster to another. Then your sword is a noble one, Wilhelm said, and it is one I would be honored to fight alongside. That single act, that bow from the most respected warrior in the kingdom, was more binding than any contract. It shattered any lingering doubts Crush or Ferris may have had. Crush stared at her loyal retainer, then back at Naruto, her expression one of dawning realization. She had been trying to negotiate with a force of nature. She had been trying to put a leash on a fox, only to discover he was in fact a lion in disguise. She stood, extending a hand not to Emilia, but to Naruto. You have my word, Naruto Uzumaki. The Karsten and Emilia camps are, from this day forward, allies. Let us show the darkness that threatens this kingdom the true meaning of the light. Naruto took her hand. The grip was firm, her resolve like steel. I look forward to it, he said. The alliance was forged, but as they left the disciplined, orderly world of the Karsten estate, Naruto knew that his life had just become impossibly more complex. He was no longer just a bodyguard. He was a diplomat, a political player, and the unwilling center of a legend in the making. Winning battles was easy. Navigating the treacherous waters of power, love, and loyalty in a world on the brink of war, that was the real trial. Chapter 11 End. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.